Chapter 27, Rob 11. Chapter text. Rob 11. The morning after the Battle of the Blackwater was unexpectedly sunny, casting a sharp contrast against the bloodshed of the previous night. The fighting had raged into the early hours, a brutal clash that left the remains of Stannis' forces either dead, fleeing, or surrendering. When the signal finally came that victory was theirs, Robb Stark collapsed to his knees in exhausted relief. Though he had seen his share of conflict during his campaigns in the Stormlands, nothing could have prepared him for the sheer chaos and brutality of this battle. They had been still half a day's ride from King's Landing when news reached them of Stannis' assault. Tywin Lannister, always the strategist, had urged caution. He insisted the city could withstand a siege for at least a week, but Robb and Jaime had been less patient. Ignoring Tywin's caution, they pressed on, riding hard with the Tyrell forces at their back. Upon reaching the outskirts of the city, they were greeted by an unexpected sight. Most of Stannis' fleet had been utterly decimated, charred and destroyed. Rumors spread through the ranks that it was wildfire that had done the damage, reportedly unleashed on the orders of Tyrion Lannister. Yet no one knew for sure. By the time Robb and his forces arrived, the battle in the bay had already begun. The Crown's men fought hard but were steadily losing ground. The defenders of King's Landing had been on the brink of collapse, outnumbered and desperate. It was the arrival of the reinforcements, sweeping in from behind Stannis' men, that turned the tide. With the combined forces of House Stark, Lannister, and Tyrell, the attackers were quickly overwhelmed, caught between two deadly fronts. Robb hadn't slept, not a moment since the battle ended. There hadn't been time, and even if there had, sleep was far from his mind. After the fighting had ceased and the last of Stannis' forces were driven back, Tywin Lannister had summoned him to discuss their losses, to tally the cost of their victory. It was a grim conversation, filled with numbers that weighed heavy on Robb's soul, thousands dead, wounded, or missing. Yet, as Tywin spoke of strategy and regrouping, Robb's thoughts drifted elsewhere, to the faces of the men who had fallen under his command, to the cries that still echoed in his mind. When the meeting finally ended, Robb found himself walking the length of the bay, his boots dragging through the blood-soaked earth. The wreckage of the battle still lay before him, a haunting reminder of the price they had paid for King's Landing. Ships, what remained of them, still smoldered in the harbor, their once proud sails now tattered remnants drifting aimlessly in the breeze. Men, injured and dying, lay scattered along the shore. For hours, Robb moved among them, helping where he could, kneeling beside those who still had breath in their bodies, regardless of whose banner they had fought under. Lannister, Tyrell, Stark, even Stannis' men, death did not discriminate, and neither would he. The sky had begun to lighten by the time Robb realized dawn was breaking. His limbs ached, and his muscles screamed for rest, but he kept moving, driven by something deeper than exhaustion. He was scared to stop, scared to face the silence that would come when the weight of everything finally settled in. Scared, most of all, to return to Roslyn. She was waiting for him, he knew. And though the thought of seeing her again filled him with longing, it also terrified him. How could she look at him the same way after what he'd done? After the man he'd become? Robb's hands were stained with blood, his soul burdened with the lives he'd taken and the horrors he had witnessed. The boy she had married was long gone, buried beneath the weight of war and loss. Would she still love the man who remained? And then there was Joffrey. Returning to King's Landing meant facing him, the boy king who had spread rumors of Roslyn carrying his bastard. Robb's fists clenched at the thought, his anger barely contained. Every fiber of his being screamed for justice, for retribution. But Robb knew he couldn't act on impulse. He had to tread carefully, for the sake of the Alliance, for the sake of Roslyn, and for the sake of the child she carried. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, Robb stood at the edge of the bay, staring out at the sea. The battle was over, but his war was far from done. As Robb stood in the great hall of the Red Keep, his gaze remained fixed ahead, barely glancing at Roslyn, who stood beside him. In the stark light of day, he felt at a loss for words. The chaos of battle still lingered in his mind, and though she was right there, so close he could feel her presence, Robb couldn't bring himself to face her just yet. He wasn't ready for that conversation, the one where he would have to tell her everything. His time away had been filled with grief, loss, and hard decisions. Renly's death, Winterfell's recapture, and Theon's betrayal, how could he begin to explain it all? And, perhaps more than anything, he wasn't ready to hear what horrors she had faced in his absence. Beside Roslin stood Sansa, pale and wide-eyed, her bloodshot gaze betraying how little sleep she'd had. Roslin had told him that she'd spent most of the night rocking Sansa, comforting her through her nightmares. The guilt weighed heavily on Robb, pulling at him with each glance he stole toward them. He had not been there for them, not during the battle, not when the city was on the brink of falling. His duties had kept him away, and though he knew his role was necessary, it didn't lessen the ache of regret. Across the aisle, Margaery Tyrell and her brother, Sir Loras, stood quietly. Margaery looked different than she had the last time Robb had seen her in Renly's camp. Her hair, once carefully styled and pinned up, now flowed freely down her back. It gave her a more youthful appearance, perhaps intentionally so, for Joffrey's sake. Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne, his expression bored, his gaze pointedly avoiding Robb and Roslin. Perhaps it was fear, or perhaps arrogance, but the Boy King had not acknowledged them once since they entered the hall. Robb knew the rumors about Joffrey's supposed relationship with Roslin had spread like wildfire through the capital. He wondered if the boy feared what Robb might say, or do, regarding the slander. The thought of confronting Joffrey right there, in front of the entire court, burned in his chest, but Robb knew better than to act on impulse. At Joffrey's side, Queen Cersei sat like a shadow, leaning in every now and then to whisper into her son's ear. Whatever she was saying, it kept his attention, though Robb doubted her words carried any real wisdom. She was likely soothing the boy's insecurities or reminding him to keep his distance from the Northern Lord who had become both ally and enemy. The tension in the room was palpable, and every word exchanged between the Queen and her son seemed to widen the gulf between the two factions of the court. All around them, courtiers murmured and whispered, their eyes darting between Robb, Roslin, and Joffrey, as though they were waiting for a confrontation, for something to break the uneasy quiet. But Robb remained still, his jaw clenched, his thoughts locked away. Today was not the day for reckoning, though he could feel it looming, like a storm on the horizon. The grand doors of the great hall swung open with a resounding thud, silencing the murmur of the court. All eyes turned as Tywin Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock, rode in atop a majestic white steed. His armor gleamed in the morning light, and the soft clatter of his horse's hooves echoed through the vast chamber as he advanced, unmoved by the stares that followed him. Joffrey, seated on the Iron Throne, rose to his feet, his voice ringing out with regal pretense. I, Joffrey of the House Baratheon, first of my name, the rightful king of the Andals and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and protector of the realm, do hereby proclaim my grandfather, Tywin Lannister, the savior of the city and the hand of the king. A servant, standing nervously beside the throne, stepped forward holding the infamous hand of the king's pin. The golden hand glimmered in the servant's trembling grip as he passed it carefully to Lord Tywin. Yet the Lord of Casterly Rock remained seated atop his horse, towering over the court with an aura of unyielding dominance. Without dismounting, Tywin took the pin and, with practiced ease, affixed it to his jacket, its golden sheen stark against the deep crimson of his attire. He spared a brief glance at Joffrey, offering only the slightest nod of acknowledgement to his grandson, the gesture just enough to be considered respectful, but coolly distant. His mere presence alone spoke volumes. Tywin Lannister was now the true power behind the throne, and all in the hall knew it. "Thank you, Your Grace," Tywin said curtly, turning his horse and exiting the hall without another word. Joffrey then shifted his gaze, his cold eyes settling on Robb. "Lord Robb Stark, step forward," he commanded. Robb moved forward, kneeling before the Iron Throne, his head bowed. "For your commendable service and resourcefulness in uniting the houses of Lannister, Stark, and Tyrell," Joffrey began, his voice echoing through the great hall, "once the crown has fully vanquished my treacherous uncle, I pledge 10,000 men to help you secure the north. Furthermore, I will grant you the finest builders in the capital to assist in the restoration of Winterfell." The room remained silent, all eyes on the kneeling lord, waiting for his response to the king's generous, if politically laden, offer. "You are too kind, Your Grace," Robb said, lifting his head to meet Joffrey's gaze. "I am most eager to return home, with my wife and our child." Joffrey's smile barely reached his eyes. The meaning behind Robb's word hung in the air, though unspoken. The Boy King simply nodded, a silent dismissal, making it clear that he had no more interest in Robb for the moment. Sir Loras Tyrell Joffrey continued, waving his hand to summon the knight forward. Loras approached the throne, kneeling in the same manner as Robb had before him. Robb could see the tension in Loras's movements. The knight clearly loathed the man sitting on the throne, but his face remained composed, his distaste hidden behind a mask of duty. "Your house has come to our aid," Joffrey proclaimed, his tone grandiose. "The whole realm is in your debt, none more so than I. If your family desires anything of me, ask, and it shall be yours." Robb could sense the weight of the moment as Loras Tyrell hesitated, his voice steady but the emotion behind it unmistakable. "Your Grace," Loras began, carefully choosing his words, "my sister, Margaery, her husband was taken from us before." His voice faltered briefly, the pain evident. "She remains innocent. I would ask that you find it in your heart to honor our house by joining it with yours." The entire hall seemed to hold its breath as Joffrey's gaze shifted to Margaery. His expression, while still smug, softened slightly as he addressed her. "Is this what you want, Lady Margaery?" Robb noticed Sansa beside him begin to fidget, anxiety flickering across her face. She had good reason to be nervous. This was a delicate moment, one that could change everything. But before Robb could act, he saw Roslyn gently take Sansa's hand, offering a silent reassurance. Sansa stilled, holding herself with the composure expected of her. "With all my heart, Your Grace," Margaery responded smoothly, her voice sultry and composed. "I have come to love you from afar, and the tales of your courage, wisdom, and strength have reached me long before I arrived in this city." Her eyes gleamed as she spoke, each word dripping with calculated affection. "Those tales have taken root deep inside of me." Margaery's tone was laced with seduction, and the hall seemed captivated by her performance. Even Joffrey appeared momentarily flustered by her beauty and grace, his usual arrogance softened in her presence. It was a masterful play, one that Robb could see had already swayed the king's favor toward the Tyrells. "I too have heard tales," Joffrey replied, his voice taking on an oily charm, "of your beauty and grace, but the stories fall short, my lady. You are even more stunning than they claim. It would be my honor to return your affections." He paused, his expression darkening as he glanced at Sansa, his gaze filled with venom. "But I am promised to another. A king must keep his word." Cersei, ever the schemer, stepped in smoothly. "Your Grace, the judgment of your small council is that it would neither be proper nor wise for you to wed the daughter of a man stripped of his titles after committing treason. While Lord Robb has fought valiantly for you," she said, her eyes briefly flitting to Robb, "we may forgive Eddard Stark's crimes, but we cannot forget them. In the interest of the realm, and with Lord Stark's permission, your council would ask that you consider setting Sansa Stark aside." Joffrey's face twisted in a mix of satisfaction and cruelty as he acknowledged his mother's words. "I understand your wishes, mother," he said, though his eyes flickered with mock reluctance. "But our betrothal was made before the gods." Maester Pycelle hobbled forward, his voice rasping through the hall. "You are right, Your Grace. A betrothal made before the gods is sacred. However, I have spoken with the High Septon, and he has agreed that the betrothal can be annulled, provided the Starks accept this as their penance for Lord Eddard's treason." All eyes turned to Robb as Cersei's voice rang out, "What say you, Lord Stark?" Robb stood tall, though a storm of emotions swirled within him. He had to play his part. He had to play that this hurt him. "I understand my father's crimes may never be fully forgiven. Though it pains me and my sister, I accept the gods' punishment and agree to the annulment of Sansa's betrothal." A smug smile spread across Joffrey's face as he stood. "The gods are merciful, and now I am free to follow my heart. I will gladly wed your sweet sister," he said, turning to Margaery with a look of false devotion. "You will be my queen, and I will love you from this day until my last day." The hall erupted into applause, a show of forced enthusiasm that echoed off the stone walls. Robb glanced at Sansa, who stood rigid, her face a mask of quiet resignation. But then he noticed Roslyn squeezing her hand tightly, offering silent support. A faint smile appeared on Sansa's lips, small, but it soon disappeared. The court was dismissed, and Robb wasted no time. He turned sharply to Sansa, his voice low and urgent. "Keep walking. Keep your head down. You need to look devastated. He has to believe he's wounded us." Sansa gave a small nod, her face already adopting the expression of a heartbroken, defeated girl. She moved beside him, her steps slow and faltering, playing the part perfectly. Roslin, walking on her other side, offered subtle but steadying support as the three of them made their way toward the exit, careful to avoid any lingering eyes. They hadn't made it far when Petyr Baelish stepped into their path, his presence as slimy as ever. "Lord Stark, Lady Stark, Lady Sansa," he greeted with a polite smile, his tone a mockery of sympathy. He took Sansa's hand, pressing a kiss to it with a soft murmur. "My deepest condolences, my lady. Such a tragic turn of events." Sansa, keeping her eyes downcast, played her part well. "Thank you, my lord," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the Queen is right. I'm not good enough for the King." Her tone was perfectly measured, a hint of sadness with a dash of humility, exactly what Baelish would expect from a girl scorned. Robb, not wanting to linger, stepped forward. "If you'll excuse us, Lord Baelish," he interrupted, his voice firm, "my sister is understandably upset, and I'd like to return to our chambers. We have much to prepare for our journey north." Baelish's smile widened ever so slightly, his eyes glinting with the hint of a game only he knew the rules to. "Leaving so soon, Lord Stark?" he asked, his tone smooth but laced with something more. "I imagine the King will be most upset to see the Lady Roslin go. He's grown rather fond of her company. But I understand. Home calls, and I'm sure Winterfell is a balm to a weary heart." Robb's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly at the veiled implications. "We've been away too long," he said curtly. "Winterfell needs its lord and lady." Baelish's eyes flickered between them, his smile never faltering. "Of course. But if I may, Lord Stark, I would caution patience. There are opportunities here in the capital, unexpected ones. Perhaps a conversation before your departure." His gaze lingered on Roslin for just a moment longer than necessary, though his face remained unreadable. Roslin instinctively moved closer to Robb, her discomfort palpable. Robb stepped between them, his voice as cold as the northern winds. "My family comes first, Lord Baelish. Always." Baelish's smile widened, as if amused by the response. "As it should," he said lightly. "I only mean to serve, my lord. A wise man never turns down good counsel, but I'm sure you already know that." Robb gave a short, dismissive nod, his patience wearing thin. "Good day, Lord Baelish." With that, Robb, Roslin, and Sansa continued their march through the hall, leaving Baelish behind. But as they walked away, Roslin couldn't help but feel the weight of his eyes on their backs, like a predator watching its prey. Once they stepped into the shadowed corridors of the Red Keep, Robb's tense silence filled the air between them. The distant sounds of clanking armor and hushed whispers echoed, but Roslin could tell that Robb's mind was elsewhere, focused, determined, yet burdened. "Sansa, go straight to your rooms and pack everything," Robb ordered in a low, firm voice, barely glancing at his sister. His eyes remained fixed ahead, sharp and unyielding. "We're leaving before the end of the week." Sansa nodded, not questioning her brother's resolve. She cast a brief glance at Roslin, worry etched in her features, before she hurried down the hallway with Shae following close behind. As their footsteps faded, Roslin felt the weight of their situation pressing down on her. Her heart raced, not only from the tension of the moment but from the growing fear that Robb wasn't telling her everything. "Robb," she called softly, trying to keep up with his long, purposeful strides. "Do you truly think Joffrey will let us leave? Just like that?" "He doesn't have a choice," Robb replied curtly, his voice hard. He didn't slow his pace, his eyes locked ahead as though he could will them out of the keep by sheer force of determination. Roslin quickened her steps, struggling to match his urgency. "Robb, please talk to me," she pleaded, frustration seeping into her voice. "What's going on? You're not telling me everything." "Not here," he muttered, his tone clipped. He marched forward, his eyes scanning the darkened halls for any prying ears or lurking eyes. The walk to their chambers felt longer than usual, the silence between them heavy and laden with unspoken fears. When they finally reached their rooms, Robb slammed the door behind them with more force than necessary, the sound reverberating off the stone walls. He locked it swiftly, ensuring their privacy. Roslin stood by the door, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched him pace the room. "Robb, what is going on?" She began again, her voice trembling with worry. She took a step closer, but before she could say more, Rob turned on his heel, striding towards her with an intensity she hadn't seen in him before. Without a word, he crashed his lips against hers, his kiss urgent and desperate. It was a kiss that spoke of frustration, of fear, of love all tangled together in the mess that was now their lives. Rosalind barely had time to respond before Rob's hands were on her, pulling her closer, as though he needed to feel her against him to remind himself that she was still there, that they were still alive. Rosalind gasped against his lips, surprised by the suddenness of his passion. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, but the intensity of his need caught her off guard. His grip was almost too tight, his desperation too palpable. "Rob," she whispered, pulling away just enough to catch her breath. "Talk to me. Please. What's happening?" He rested his forehead against hers, his chest heaving with each breath as if the weight of the world had been placed on his shoulders. His eyes, dark and stormy, locked onto hers. For a moment, he didn't speak, as if he were gathering the strength to say the words he had been holding back. "I don't deserve you," Rob whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. "One day, you'll see me for the man I really am, and then I'll lose you." Rosalind's heart clenched at the raw emotion in his words, the weight of the guilt he carried evident in every syllable. She reached up, gently cupping his face in her hands, her thumb brushing over his cheek with a tenderness that was almost desperate. "You're not going to lose me," she whispered fiercely, her voice steady even as her heart ached for him. "But you have to talk to me, Rob. Let me help you. Please." He let out a shaky breath, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of everything he had been holding on to was finally crushing him. His hands dropped to his sides, and for a moment, he looked like a man on the edge of breaking. "I've killed, Rosalind," he began, his voice low and rough. "Men who were fighting for what they believed in. Fighting for their king. And I cut them down. Every one of them had families, lives, people waiting for them. And I took that away. And the whole time," his voice cracked, and he clenched his fists. "The whole time, I was thinking of you. Of our child." "Rob," Rosalind began, but he shook his head, cutting her off. "It's war," she tried again, her voice gentle but firm. "You can't possibly blame yourself for doing what you had to do. You fought to protect us, to survive. And I left you here, alone with that monster," he said bitterly, his eyes darkening as he spoke. "I've heard the things they say. About you. About him. Joffrey. I know it's not true, but the thought of him being anywhere near you, of him claiming you, of him calling our child his voice broke, and he turned away, as though the very thought was too much to bear. Rosalind's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let the fear in his eyes consume her. She stepped closer, taking his hands in hers and guiding them to her stomach, where their child grew. "This is your child, Rob," she said softly, her voice unwavering. "And I am your wife. You came back to me, and that's what matters. Nothing else." Tears welled in Rob's eyes as he gazed at her, the intensity of his emotions almost too much to contain. Rosalind reached up, brushing a stray hair from his cheek before leaning in to kiss him gently on the lips, a kiss filled with the promise of love, hope, and the future they would build together. "Nothing else matters," Rosalind whispered again, her lips brushing against his. Rob closed his eyes, savoring the closeness, but her next words pulled him back to the harsh reality they faced. "I don't believe for a second that Joffrey will simply let us leave," Rosalind said, her voice steady but filled with concern. "We're not done here yet. But as long as Sansa is safe and we're safe, I will do anything to get out of here." "That sounds like a promise, Lady Stark," Rob replied with a soft laugh, a glimmer of warmth cutting through the tension. Rosalind gave him a small, determined smile. "As long as you promise to take me home, Robb Stark." Chapter 28, Robb 12. Chapter text. Robb 12. The morning sun had barely begun to creep over the city walls when Robb made his way to the Tower of the Hand, the shadowy halls of the Red Keep still eerily quiet. He moved with purpose, though every step felt heavier than the last. The last thing he wanted was another conversation with Tywin Lannister. He would have much preferred to be gathering his family and ride for Winterfell, putting as much distance between them and King's Landing as possible. But Robb knew better, he understood the delicate game of politics. Keeping the Lannisters appeased, especially after the victory at Blackwater, was crucial for his survival. As he walked, his mind raced with thoughts of the dangers they still faced. Stannis was no longer the immediate threat, his forces either destroyed or scattered, but Robb knew Joffrey all too well. The Boy King was volatile, cruel, and vengeful. It wouldn't take much for his attentions to shift. He was surrounded by flatterers and sycophants who could easily twist his fragile mind. As Robb pushed open the heavy wooden door, the scent of parchment and wax filled his senses. Behind a large, imposing desk sat Tywin Lannister, every inch the calculating lord that Robb had come to expect. His silver hair gleamed in the soft light, and his sharp eyes barely glanced up as Robb entered, still fixated on a parchment in his hands. A towering pile of documents lay beside him, no doubt reports, letters, and strategies for solidifying the Lannister grip on the realm. "Ah, Lord Stark," Tywin said, his voice cool and measured, as if Robb's presence were nothing more than a minor detail in his grander schemes. He didn't bother standing, merely acknowledging Robb with the faintest nod. "Thank you for joining me. We have much to discuss." Robb forced himself to maintain his composure, though his instincts screamed at him to do anything but. There was something deeply unsettling about the man before him. Tywin had an air of indifference that made him all the more dangerous. He didn't need to raise his voice to command a room, and Robb could feel the weight of his calculating gaze as he finally looked up from the papers. Robb inclined his head slightly in response. "Lord Hand," he replied, stepping further into the room. His eyes briefly darted to the papers scattered across the desk, maps of the North, troop movements, letters from lords sworn to the crown. "Sit." Tywin gestured to the chair across from him without any warmth. It wasn't a request, more of an expectation. Robb hesitated for a heartbeat before he complied, lowering himself into the chair and keeping his posture straight, shoulders squared. He was here as the Lord of Winterfell, and he wouldn't let the older man intimidate him, even if the Lannisters held all the cards for now. Tywin set aside the parchment he had been reading and folded his hands in front of him. "You've proven yourself a capable leader, Lord Stark," he began, his tone clipped but with an air of finality that suggested he was about to pivot to something far more important. "The realm is at a delicate juncture. With Stannis defeated and Renly dead, their claims to the throne is all but extinguished. That leaves us with an opportunity, to restore order, but also to eliminate any lingering threats to the crown." He let the words hang, watching Robb closely for his reaction. Robb's jaw clenched, but he didn't let his face betray his thoughts. "Order," he repeated carefully. "Or control?" Tywin's lips curled into something resembling a smile, though it lacked any warmth. "What's the difference, Lord Stark? One cannot exist without the other. Joffrey is king now, and the realm needs stability. The North, as well as the South." Robb's mind raced. He knew that Tywin wasn't just speaking of distant enemies. He was talking about consolidating power, about ensuring that no one, not even the Starks, would challenge the Lannisters' hold over Westeros. "I've no desire for further bloodshed," Robb said, choosing his words cautiously. "My only wish is to return to Winterfell and to restore my lands." Tywin leaned back in his chair, his cold gaze fixed on Robb, the hint of a smile playing at the edges of his lips, though it never reached his eyes. "Of course," he said smoothly, his voice rich with calculated diplomacy. "I would be failing in my duties as Hand of the King, however, if I didn't ask you to consider staying here, in the capital." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the air between them. Robb's brow furrowed slightly, but he said nothing. "You've shown yourself to have a good mind," Tywin continued, his tone almost complimentary, though it carried an undercurrent of condescension. "Even if you are young and prone to certain, impulsive decisions. But that can be tempered with time and the right guidance. I can offer you a place on the King's Council, where your voice might carry influence in matters that affect the realm. You'd be in a position to safeguard your family's interests." Robb's mind raced as he weighed the implications of the offer. He could already sense the strings attached, the subtle manipulation that Tywin was weaving. A place on the council was no small thing, being tied to the capital, tied to the Lannisters, would grant him proximity to power, but it would also entangle him in the toxic politics of King's Landing, and worse, bind him to Joffrey's reign. Tywin's sharp eyes studied his silence, a knowing glint in them. "Your sister," he pressed on, seems to have grown comfortable here in the south. Sansa may have been unfortunate in her original betrothal, but I hear she has found a certain acceptance among those who reside here. She could thrive, with the right arrangements, and it wouldn't be hard for us to find her a more suitable southern husband. Your wife, too, seems to have made a few allies of her own. Robb's lips tightened into a thin line. His thoughts flew to Sansa, who had been forced to endure so much at the hands of the Lannisters and Joffrey, and to Roslyn, who had been thrust into the viper's nest and somehow managed to survive, even thrive, despite the danger all around her. He could not deny that both women had adapted to their new realities, but that didn't mean they were safe. And it certainly didn't mean he wanted to remain here in this nest of treachery. Tywine, sensing his hesitation, pressed further. The north may be your home, but it is isolated. The Seven Kingdoms are vast, and those who refuse to engage with the rest of the realm, tend to find themselves isolated in other ways. You could build a legacy here, Lord Stark. One that ensures your family's safety and prosperity for generations to come. Leave your father to rule the north, at least for a short while. I appreciate your offer, Lord Tywine. Robb began slowly, carefully weighing each word. But my duty is to the north. My people need me. Winterfell must be rebuilt, and the north requires strong leadership after the devastation it has endured. He paused, locking eyes with Tywine, letting the weight of his convictions settle in the room. My family's place is in the north, and that is where we will return. Tywine leaned back in his chair, the faintest shadow of a smile crossing his lips, though his eyes remained cold and calculating. I expected no different, Lord Stark, he said smoothly, his tone almost amused, as though Robb's rejection had been a predictable move on a chessboard. But you can't blame me for asking. It's the hand's duty to explore all possibilities. He steepled his fingers, considering Robb for a moment. Let us, then, consider other ways to unite our houses. Robb's jaw clenched slightly. He knew there was always an angle with Tywine Lannister, always another route to power. Joffrey was a poor match for your sister, Tywine continued, his voice casual but sharp as a blade. That boy is in need of a woman who can keep him in line, and I don't think your sister was up for the challenge. Margaery Tyrell, however, may just succeed where Sansa failed. Robb agreed in silence. He didn't want to think about the future Sansa might have endured, had her engagement to Joffrey gone forward. The cruelty, the endless manipulation, it would have crushed her spirit. Tywine shifted slightly in his chair, his sharp eyes never leaving Robb. Sansa may be free from that particular arrangement, but her value remains undiminished. The Stark name carries great weight, especially now that your sister has shown a growing aptitude for navigating the intricacies of the court. Her future, Lord Stark, is something that requires careful consideration. There are still alliances to be forged. He paused, a faint, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. For instance, I have several nephews who remain unwed. Or even Jaime. Perhaps it's time he settled down. A chill ran down Robb's spine at the suggestion. Sansa wasn't free, her value as a political pawn had merely shifted. The Lannisters still saw her as a tool to secure their own power. Jaime Lannister, one of the very men who had caused his family so much grief, was now being suggested as a potential husband for Sansa. The thought made Robb's blood run cold. My sister is not some piece to be bartered or bargained with, Robb interjected, his voice low but firm, laced with barely contained anger. She is my family, not a pawn for your games. Sansa will return to Winterfell with me, where she belongs. Tywine didn't flinch at Robb's tone, but a cool, knowing gleam flickered in his eyes. He leaned back, his fingers tapping together as he studied Robb carefully, like a predator assessing the strength of its prey. As you wish, he said coolly, but Robb knew the conversation was far from over. Tywine never let an opportunity for manipulation slip away, and Robb could see that glint now, the flicker of a predator circling its prey. But tell me this, Tywine continued, his voice smooth and measured, will Sansa truly be happy back in the north? Winterfell may be her home, but the north is a far cry from the life she's experienced here. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. When the time comes for her to marry, and it will come sooner than you think, will she eagerly wed a 40-year-old northern lord with 5 sons already from a previous wife? A man who can offer her nothing more than a cold castle and a life of duty. Robb's jaw tightened, but he held his tongue. Sansa had already suffered so much. Robb knew she longed for the safety and familiarity of home, but Tywine was not wrong in suggesting that the life of a northern lady would be starkly different from the glittering halls of the capital. Tywine leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering, becoming almost conspiratorial. The thing about girls of a certain age, he said, is once they've tasted what it's like to stand beside power, real power, nothing else will ever suffice. She has seen the court, the way people bow and scrape, the way decisions made in a single room here shape the entire realm. And you cannot keep her locked away in Winterfell forever, Robb. Robb stiffened at the sound of his name. He knew exactly what he was doing, needling at Robb's insecurities, making him question his ability to protect and provide for his sister. Sansa will be a woman within the next year or so, Tywine continued, his voice soft but laced with authority. And a woman of her station requires a husband. Do you truly believe you can shield her from this fate forever? Sooner or later, she will need to marry, and the North may not hold the allure for her that it once did. Not after everything she's experienced here. Robb's temper flared. Tywine's words were venomous, designed to twist the knife in his gut. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, Sansa's future, her happiness, her safety. But he would not let Tywine manipulate him into making a rash decision. His sister had suffered enough, and he would not throw her back into the jaws of the political wolves for the sake of convenience. Winterfell may not be King's Landing, Robb said, his voice steady but firm, but it is her home. Sansa deserves peace, not more schemes and manipulation. I won't let her become a pawn in someone else's game again. Tywine's eyes flickered, as if amused by Robb's resistance. Peace, he mused, his voice low and contemplative. A rare commodity in this world, Lord Stark. You should ask yourself if it's something you can truly offer her. Winterfell may seem like a refuge, but the North is hardly safe. The Ironborn still threaten your lands, and who knows what other dangers lurk in the shadows. Robb clenched his fists, his mind racing. Tywine was right about one thing, the North was far from stable. But the very idea of Sansa being manipulated by the Lannisters for the rest of her life was unbearable. His sister had already been a pawn in their games, and he was determined to put an end to that. Tywine, ever the master strategist, seemed to sense Robb's inner conflict. He arched an eyebrow slightly, as if amused by Robb's turmoil. But it is your decision to make, Tywine finally said, his tone smooth and calculated, as though he was willing to grant Robb this one victory for the moment. If you truly believe that Sansa is safest at Winterfell, then of course that is where she should be. The conversation, at least regarding Sansa, was over. Tywine's voice held no room for further discussion, and the elder Lannister rose from his seat. He walked toward the large window behind his desk, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out over King's Landing. The sun's rays filtered through the glass, casting an ominous golden glow over the room as Tywine turned his thoughts to another matter entirely. Now Tywine began, his voice taking on a more formal, businesslike tone, the true purpose of this meeting. Let us discuss the men that the crown has promised you. Robb straightened in his chair, his attention now fully captured. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the resources he needed to reclaim his home, to drive out the enemies who had taken it from him. The prospect of bolstering his forces brought a brief surge of hope, one that he clung to amidst the uncertainty of his position. As agreed, the crown will provide you with 10,000 men to help rescue the North, Tywine began, his words measured. This is in addition to the 2,000 men already on their way to Winterfell as we speak. Robb felt a sense of relief wash over him. With those numbers, he would have a real chance of restoring order and reclaiming Winterfell from any forces that dared oppose him. His grip on the North could finally be strengthened, the Starks could rule their lands once again, but then Tywine spoke again, and the flicker of hope dimmed. However, Tywine continued, turning slightly from the window to glance at Robb, the men are tired. They have fought hard and will require rest before they march north again. Therefore, the crown humbly asks that you remain here in the capital for a few months. Robb's relief evaporated. His jaw tightened as he instinctively began to protest. But Tywine held up a hand, cutting him off. His voice remained calm, though there was an undeniable finality to it. Tired men will not win battles, Lord Stark. You would be sending them to their deaths if they marched immediately. Robb swallowed the lump of frustration that was rising in his throat. He understood the logic behind Tywin's words, but the idea of lingering in King's Landing, surrounded by Lannisters, while his home remained vulnerable was maddening. Tywin continued smoothly, his tone as unyielding as stone. The king's wedding to Lady Margaery Tyrell will take place in 2 months' time on the first day of the new year. Once the festivities are over, you may take your men and return to Winterfell. Robb's stomach churned at the thought of staying here for another 2 months, but Tywin pressed on. The realm needs something to celebrate, Lord Stark, Tywin said, his voice laced with an odd sort of condescension, as though explaining something to a child. Moving straight from one war to another will serve no one. This wedding will bring stability to the realm, and you will have your men in the best condition possible to reclaim the north. The pragmatism in Tywin's argument was difficult to refute. War-weary men could not fight effectively, and the north would be a treacherous campaign. Even Robb knew that. But the delay still grated on him. He had been so close to seeing a clear path home, only for it to be snatched away yet again. Tywin, sensing Robb's resistance, offered one final point to sweeten the deal. In the meantime, your wife can assist Lady Margaery in learning the ways of the court. It will give you the opportunity to solidify your alliances here, and you will be able to return to the north in time for your child's birth. The mention of his unborn child caught Robb off guard, stirring something deep within him. The desire to protect his family, to bring them home safely, was all-consuming. Tywin had masterfully woven a plan that played on Robb's deepest instincts, the need for his men to be strong, for his family to be safe, and for him to fulfill his duties as both a lord and a father. Robb took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. His instinct was to leave King's Landing as soon as possible, to get far away from the Lannisters and their manipulations. But Tywin had effectively tied his hands. If he wanted the full strength of the Crown's forces, he had to wait. And 2 months, though frustrating, was a small price to pay for the security of his family and the future of the North. I understand, Robb said, his voice tight but controlled. We will stay until the wedding. Tywin inclined his head slightly, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips as if he had expected no other outcome. Very wise, Lord Stark, he said. Robb gave a stiff nod, the weight of Tywin's words settling heavily on his shoulders. He knew this was a game of politics and power, and for now, he had no choice but to play along. But in the back of his mind, one thought remained clear: he would not let the Lannisters control him any longer than necessary. 2 months. No more, no less. Chapter 29, Sansa 2. Chapter text. Sansa 2. It had been a week since the Battle of the Blackwater, and the constant stream of pitying looks and hollow words of commiseration had finally begun to fade. At first, courtiers would approach Sansa with feigned sympathy, their eyes gleaming with curiosity rather than concern. But soon enough, most of them seemed to forget entirely that she had ever been betrothed to the king. Her former engagement to Joffrey, once the subject of endless gossip and speculation, had been all but erased from the minds of those in court. The excitement in the capital had shifted entirely to the royal wedding. Everywhere Sansa went, people whispered about the match between Joffrey and Margaery Tyrell, how perfect they were together, how radiant Margaery looked beside the young king, how their union would bring prosperity and unity to the realm. The court, always quick to abandon old scandals in favor of new spectacles, had moved on, and that suited Sansa just fine. She watched it all from the shadows, grateful to be forgotten. In truth, she was relieved that her betrothal had been severed, though the circumstances of its end had been slightly humiliating. Being cast aside in favor of Margaery had stung, but it was a small price to pay for freedom from Joffrey's cruelty. Sansa had once dreamed of being a queen, but that dream had become a nightmare the moment she saw Joffrey's true nature. Now, as she saw the court fawn over Margaery, she realized just how fortunate she had been to escape. The Tyrells, with their charm and beauty, had swept into King's Landing and captured the hearts of everyone. Margaery, in particular, had an effortless grace and poise that made her seem the ideal queen. Even Joffrey, who had once taken such cruel pleasure in tormenting Sansa, now seemed softened in Margaery's presence. He smiled for her, acted the part of a gallant king, and the court adored the spectacle. They marveled at how this new queen had tamed the lion. But Sansa knew better. She had seen the darker side of Joffrey, the sadistic pleasure he took in others' pain. She doubted that even Margary's beauty and cunning could shield her from it forever. Still, Sansa kept these thoughts to herself. She played her role, offering polite smiles and quiet compliments when necessary, blending into the background as she always had. For now, she was content to be overlooked, to let the court's attention drift elsewhere. The less they thought about her, the safer she felt. Sansa's mind was no longer occupied with dreams of being queen, instead, her thoughts were of home. Robb had promised they would leave soon, and the prospect of returning to Winterfell was the only thing keeping her grounded. The North seemed like a distant dream, a place where she might finally be free of the games and intrigues of the South. As the preparations for the royal wedding grew more extravagant by the day, Sansa found herself feeling a strange sense of detachment. The glittering feasts, the lavish gowns, the endless talk of power and alliances, it all seemed so hollow now. Let Margaery wear the crown, let her bask in the praise and adoration of the court. Sansa had tasted what life as Joffrey's queen would have been, and she wanted no part of it. The world around her spun on, but Sansa remained still, waiting patiently for the moment when she could leave King's Landing behind forever. The court might have forgotten her, but she had not forgotten herself. She was still Sansa Stark of Winterfell, and one day soon, she would return to her true home. Sansa walked slowly from her chambers, the familiar stone corridors of the Red Keep giving way to the lush greenery of the gardens. These gardens had become her sanctuary during her time in King's Landing, a place where the intrigues of the court felt distant, where she could breathe more freely. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming roses and lavender, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine that she was far away from the capital. She was on her way to meet her brother Robb and his wife, Roslyn, for afternoon tea, a small tradition they had started since Robb's return to King's Landing. It was one of the few things Sansa looked forward to in the city. The time spent with Robb, whom she had feared lost to the war, felt like a balm to her soul. She was so happy to have him back, to see him whole and well, and she knew that Roslyn felt the same. There was something about the way Robb looked at Roslyn, a tenderness in his gaze that never seemed to waver. And Roslyn, for her part, seemed to glow in his presence, her eyes always following him with an unspoken adoration. If you spent even a short time with them, you could feel it, the connection, the bond that went beyond words. It was the kind of love Sansa had once dreamed of, the kind she had believed was waiting for her in the capital. As she walked, Sansa found herself smiling at the thought of the evenings she had spent with Roslyn. After dinner, the two would sit together by the fire, sharing quiet moments of companionship. They would talk about baby names, and Sansa would listen with fascination as Roslyn spoke of her hopes and dreams for her child. Roslyn's face would light up as she imagined her future as a mother, and Sansa often found herself caught up in that same warmth, imagining herself one day with a family of her own. They would laugh together as Sansa offered suggestions for things she could sew for the baby, blankets, small clothes, little tunics. In those moments, Sansa felt something shift within her. The idea of being queen, of wearing a crown and sitting beside a king, no longer held the allure it once had. That dream had turned to ash the moment she had seen Joffrey's cruelty, the harsh reality of what life as his wife would have been. Now, she longed for something far simpler, something truer. She wanted a love like the one Robb and Roslyn shared, a love built on trust and mutual respect, not manipulation and deceit. She wanted a home, a family, and the chance to live a life free of the dangerous games that the courtiers of King's Landing played. As Sansa reached the gardens, the sunlight filtering through the leaves above, she saw Robb and Roslyn already seated at a small table. Roslyn's hand rested gently on her growing belly, and Robb leaned close, whispering something that made her laugh. Sansa paused for a moment, just watching them, her heart swelling with affection for both of them. This was what she wanted, this quiet, peaceful happiness. A love that endured, even through war and hardship. She approached them, and Roslyn greeted her with a smile that was as warm as the sun above. Robb stood and pulled out a chair for her, ever the gentleman. Sansa felt herself relax as she sat down, the weight of the city and all its dangers momentarily lifting. She had been through so much, seen too many dreams crumble, but here, in this small circle of family, she found hope. Robb leaned back in his chair, a soft smile playing on his lips as he looked between Sansa and Roslyn. "I hope you don't mind," he began, his voice casual but carrying an air of consideration, but I invited Lady Margaery to join us today. Sansa's eyes widened slightly in surprise, and Roslyn raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Robb continued before either could ask, his tone warm. I spent some time with her at Renly's camp. I found her company refreshing. She's clever and kind, and I think you'll both get along with her quite well. Of course, Sansa replied softly, giving Robb a small smile. I've heard many good things about her from the other ladies of the court. Her tone was cautious, but there was no denying the curiosity bubbling beneath the surface. She had seen Margaery's poise, her ability to charm even the most dangerous men, but she wondered what the woman was truly like away from the eyes of the court. Roslyn, always attuned to the subtleties around her, nodded thoughtfully. I look forward to meeting her properly, she said, glancing at Sansa with a knowing smile. Robb seemed relieved by their responses, his smile widening. Good. I think you'll find her a breath of fresh air. She knows how to play the game, but there's something genuine about her. Sansa nodded, though her mind raced with thoughts of what this meeting might hold. Margaery had already managed to capture the favor of nearly everyone at court, including the most dangerous man in her life, Joffrey. Sansa wondered if the woman was truly as kind-hearted as she appeared, or if she simply had mastered the art of appearing to be whatever the court needed her to be. But if Robb trusted her, then perhaps Margaery was someone worth knowing on a deeper level. From the far side of the garden, Sansa caught sight of Lady Margaery entering with a graceful stride, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. Margaery's long, soft curls cascaded down her back, styled in the same southern fashion that Sansa had come to adopt during her time in King's Landing. Her gown was stunning, duck-egg blue with delicate gold embroidery that shimmered as she moved. The fabric clung to her slender frame, swaying gently with each step she took, the gold threads catching the sunlight in a way that made her seem to glow. Sansa noticed that Margaery wasn't alone. Walking beside her, arm in arm, was an older woman who moved with the same quiet grace. Sansa immediately knew who she was, Lady Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns. The older woman was a figure of legend in courtly circles, known for her sharp tongue, quick wit, and unparalleled understanding of politics. She wore a gown of deep emerald green, the color of her house, and a headscarf adorned with intricate golden detailing. Her eyes were as sharp as her reputation, scanning the garden as if taking note of everything and everyone at once. As Margaery and her grandmother approached, Sansa rose from her seat instinctively, smoothing the fabric of her own gown and glancing at Roslyn, who gave her a reassuring smile. Robb, ever the diplomat, stood and bowed his head respectfully to the two ladies. His smile was warm, but Sansa could see the subtle shift in his expression, a careful balance of politeness and guardedness. Lady Margaery. Robb greeted her with genuine warmth. Thank you for joining us. Margaery smiled, her eyes sparkling as she gave a graceful curtsy. Thank you for inviting me, Lord Stark. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. And please, allow me to introduce my grandmother, Lady Olenna. Sansa and Roslyn curtsied in unison as Lady Olenna acknowledged them with a brisk nod, her sharp eyes flicking over the two women, sizing them up in an instant. With a chuckle, she tapped Robb lightly on the shoulder. Robb Stark, she said, her tone half serious, tell your wife she has no business curtsying in her condition. She should be resting, not bending and bowing. Roslyn blushed slightly but smiled, while Robb gave a soft laugh in response. I've heard plenty about you all, Olenna continued, her voice laced with wry humor. Though I must admit, I'm relieved to see you've managed to survive this nest of vipers. Her words were sharp, but Sansa could tell there was no malice in them, only the blunt honesty of someone who had long since grown tired of playing the game of courtly pretense. It was clear Olenna preferred to speak the truth, regardless of whether it stung. Lady Olenna, Roslyn replied, her voice calm and measured, it's an honor to meet you. Your wisdom is well known across the realm. Olenna's lips curled into a wry smile. Wisdom, eh? You're far too kind, my dear. Wisdom is just another word for surviving long enough to see the lies for what they are. Margaery gently squeezed her grandmother's arm, subtly guiding the conversation to a lighter tone. We're so pleased to be here. Robb was very kind to me after everything that happened with Dot. She hesitated for a brief moment, choosing her words carefully. When we last met, she corrected herself gracefully. I must say, I do enjoy the capital, and everyone has been most welcoming. Her gaze softened as she turned to Sangza, her voice laced with curiosity and concern. "I've been meaning to ask, Lady Sangza, how are you faring, now that certain plans have changed?" The question was gentle, yet direct, probing at the delicate shift in Sangza's circumstances without lingering on the painful details. Sangza felt the weight of Margary's question. The mention of her broken betrothal to Joffrey still brought a mix of relief and fear. But standing here, in the garden, surrounded by her family and in the presence of these two formidable women, Sangza felt a new kind of strength. The Lannisters no longer held her in their cruel grasp. "I am well," Sangza replied carefully, her voice calm and steady. "The king made the right choice, and I have come to accept that." Her words were measured, each one deliberate, but her gaze didn't waver. "And I am grateful to have my brother and Lady Roslyn here with me." Margary's smile deepened. "I'm glad to hear it. You've been through so much, Sangza. But I do hope that, in time, we can all find a bit of happiness. King's Landing has a way of trying to steal that from you, doesn't it?" Olenna snorted softly, shaking her head. "Happiness? Not in this cesspit, I'm afraid. But perhaps, with the right allies, we can at least survive long enough to remember what it feels like." She gave Sangza a knowing look, one that sent a shiver down her spine, as if Olenna could see through all the layers of deception in the capital. Robb chuckled lightly, trying to ease the tension. "Survival, it seems, is the key to all things here. But I have no doubt that with strong allies, we'll not only survive, we'll thrive." Margary exchanged a glance with her grandmother, a silent understanding passing between them before turning back to Robb with a gentle smile. "Indeed, Lord Stark," she began, her voice smooth and warm. "Which brings us to the reason my grandmother and I wished to speak with you." She shifted her attention to Sangza, reaching across the table to take Sangza's hands in hers. "Lady Sangza," she said softly, her expression sincere, "I feel truly awful about the way we met and the possibility that I may have caused you any pain. I couldn't bear it." Sangza opened her mouth to respond, "Please, my lady." But Margary pressed on, her tone firm yet kind. "As a gesture of apology, and to mend any hurt I might have caused, we have a proposal for you." She glanced briefly at Olenna before continuing. "An alliance between our houses." Olenna's sharp eyes flickered toward Robb, her lips curling into a knowing smile. "What my granddaughter means to say is this: with your brother's blessing, we would like to arrange a marriage between you, Lady Sangza, and my eldest grandson, Margary's brother, Willers." Sangza blinked, her breath catching in her throat as the weight of the offer settled over her. Sangza's thoughts spiraled, trying to comprehend what was unfolding before her. A marriage to Willers Tyrell. She had never met him, only heard whispers about the gentle but reclusive air of Highgarden. Yet here it was, a proposal hanging in the air. Before Sangza could respond, Robb leaned forward, his expression hard and protective, his eyes sharp as they met Lady Olenna's. His voice, though polite, carried an edge of frustration. "My lady, I wish this had been brought to me in private. Sangza is not seeking any proposals at this time." Lady Olenna interrupted him, her voice brisk, cutting through his words like a blade. "Oh, I know all about your plans, Lord Stark," she said, her tone laced with the confidence of someone who'd seen far too much to be easily swayed. "You intend to whisk your sister back to the cold north, far from the clutches of the south, after the king's wedding. But tell me, do you truly believe that leaving her without a match will keep her safe? You'd leave her vulnerable, ripe for any number of dangerous arrangements. And the north, as I hear, is far from secure." She leaned in slightly, her eyes gleaming with sharp wisdom. "House Tyrell will protect you from the Lannisters. Or would you rather entertain Lord Tywin's list of potential husbands?" Robb's jaw tightened, his frustration clearly mounting as Olenna spoke. Her words hung in the air like a storm gathering strength. When Olenna mentioned Tywin, Robb flinched, his silence speaking volumes. He leaned back in his chair, tension crackling between him and the matriarch of Highgarden. Roslyn looked at him, her voice soft but insistent. "Robb." Sangza, feeling a sudden chill, turned to her brother. "Brother," she whispered, her heart pounding. The very mention of Tywin's name sent unease through her. Robb exhaled, his features hardening with an admission he had been reluctant to share. "Lord Tywin made a few suggestions," he said, his voice tight. He didn't look at Sansa immediately, as if dreading her reaction. About matches for you. He made it clear that the Lannisters still see value in our name. He offered his nephews, and even suggested possibly Jaime. He shook his head, frustration now evident in every tense muscle of his body. I said no. Sansa is coming home to Winterfell. Sansa's chest tightened at the thought. Jaime Lannister. Her mind raced through the implications. She could hardly stand the idea of being bound to a Lannister, shackled to a family that had brought her so much grief and pain. But now, hearing Robb's admission, she realized that even escaping King's Landing didn't free her from being seen as a pawn. Olenna tilted her head, her piercing gaze softening just slightly. And what do you think will happen when you return to Winterfell, Lord Stark? She asked, her voice no longer cutting, but pragmatic. Do you think the Lannisters will simply forget about her? Sansa will remain a prize, whether she's here or buried in the snow. You cannot hide her forever, and you cannot keep her away from the game by running. Robb didn't answer immediately, his face reflecting the weight of Olenna's words. His gaze flickered to Sansa, a mixture of guilt and protectiveness swirling in his eyes. I want to keep you safe, he said softly, finally meeting her eyes. I promised Father I'd protect you. Sansa's heart ached at her brother's sincerity, but she knew Olenna's words carried truth. She had long been a piece in a much larger game, and she understood that, whether she liked it or not, the decisions made about her life would ripple across the kingdoms. She had no desire to be a political tool, yet escaping that fate seemed almost impossible. Unless. Margaery, who had been silent for much of the conversation, leaned forward, her expression kind and sincere. Sansa, I know this is overwhelming, she said gently, her voice like a soothing balm to the tension. But I promise you this, Willers is a good man. You'd be with people who would care for you, protect you, and give you a life of your own choosing. Sansa looked at her, seeing nothing but compassion in Margaery's eyes. There was no malice, no manipulation, only an offer. An offer that felt like hope. And Margaery added with a soft smile, you would have me as a sister. And I think we'd get along quite well. The words brought a small, genuine smile to Sansa's lips despite the heavy conversation. The warmth from Margaery, the idea of escape from the clutches of the Lannisters, and the chance for something resembling peace, it all felt like a lifeline. Robb sighed, rubbing his temple, clearly torn. Sansa, if you want this, I will support your choice. I won't force you into anything. But know this, whatever you decide, you can always come home. Sansa sat in silence for a moment, weighing the choice before her. She could return to Winterfell, try to find safety in the cold walls of her childhood home. But Olenna was right, the Lannisters would not forget her, and the North would not be free from their reach. Or she could accept the Tyrell's offer, forge a new alliance, and perhaps, finally, escape the shadow of her past. Sansa finally found her voice, though it came out quieter than she intended. And, what of Willers? Does he wish this? She asked, her fingers trembling slightly beneath Margaery's. Olenna's eyes softened just a fraction. He's already agreed, my dear. Sansa? Robb asked, his voice gentle as his eyes settled on her. What do you want? I think I could be happy in Highgarden, Sansa said softly, though her voice grew stronger as she continued. I've dreamed of leaving this place, and if Willers is as kind as you say, I would be honored to wed him. Margaery squeezed her hands in support, her smile widening. You'll find Highgarden is nothing like this city, Sansa. It's a place of beauty, of life, and I have no doubt you will flourish there. Olenna chuckled under her breath, clearly pleased with the outcome. Well then, it seems we have an agreement. Lord Stark, she said, turning her sharp gaze toward Robb. Robb hesitated for a brief moment, but seeing the determination in Sansa's eyes, he nodded. If this is what Sansa wishes, then I'll give my blessing. A sense of relief washed over the table, though the weight of the decision still lingered. Sansa had been granted an escape, a chance for a new life, one not dictated by fear or cruelty. But as they all sat in the peaceful garden, the realization settled that this marriage would be more than just a personal choice, it was the beginning of a new alliance, one that would ripple across the Seven Kingdoms. Then it's settled, Olenna declared, rising from her chair with an unexpected swiftness and grace for a woman of her years. Her sharp eyes gleamed with satisfaction, as if she'd just secured a victory in a long-played game of strategy. Sansa will return to Highgarden with me after Margaery's wedding. Sansa's breath caught in her throat as she watched Olenna move with purpose, the finality of the statement sinking in. It was happening, her fate, her future was being decided in this moment, and the weight of it bore down on her chest. Highgarden, a place she had never seen but heard stories of, a place so unlike the frozen north or the treacherous capital. She tried to imagine it, a life among roses and warm southern breezes, far from the cold stone of Winterfell and the bitter danger of King's Landing. It was a world she barely knew, but the hope it offered felt like a balm for her weary soul. Highgarden will be a fresh start, Margaery added, her voice filled with encouragement. She had risen as well, her hand resting lightly on the back of her grandmother's chair, her gaze shifting warmly to Sansa. You'll find peace there, Sansa. And Willers, he's kind. You'll have the freedom you deserve, and your brother can rest knowing you're safe. Sansa felt a warmth spreading through her chest at Margaery's words. It was not lost on her that this was a far cry from the marriage she had once been promised to Joffrey, a monstrous boy king who had reveled in cruelty. Willers, by all accounts, was gentle and wise. She knew he was not like the Lannisters, no matter how little she knew of him personally. The reputation of House Tyrell was far kinder than that of the Golden Lions who had ruled her life for so long. Still, it was a new fear that gripped her heart. What if she failed again? What if this, too, turned out to be another cage, albeit one gilded with roses instead of thorns? Rosalind stood beside Robb, her gentle face showing quiet concern. She reached for Sansa's hand, squeezing it reassuringly. Sansa, she said softly, this could be your chance to have the life you deserve. A family of your own, away from all of this. She motioned faintly to the grand yet suffocating surroundings of the Red Keep. And you'll never be without family, Robb added, his voice thick with determination. No matter where you go, I will always be there for you. The North will always be there for you. Sansa nodded, a wave of emotion rising in her throat. The love and protectiveness of her brother, the warmth of Rosalind's support, and even the calculated but genuine offer from the Tyrells, it was all coming together, giving her something she hadn't had in what felt like a lifetime, a choice. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with a mix of hope and fear. I think this is the right path. Olenna's eyes gleamed, satisfied. Of course it is, girl. You'll thank me one day, when you're sitting in Highgarden surrounded by your beautiful children. She glanced at Margaery, giving a brief nod before adding, we'll make the arrangements, and when the time comes, you'll leave this place behind. Margaery's wedding will be soon enough, and then we'll take you home. Home. The word lingered in Sansa's mind. For so long, her only vision of home had been Winterfell, with its cold winds and familiar halls. But perhaps Highgarden could become that too, a new home, a new beginning. It wouldn't erase the pain of her past, but it could offer her something she had been chasing for so long, freedom. And with that, perhaps a chance at love, or at the very least, peace. As Olenna and Margaery discussed the details with Robb and Rosalind, Sansa's mind wandered, her thoughts drifting to the possibility of meeting Willers Tyrell. Would he be as kind as they all said? Would he understand her, see her not just as a political prize, but as a person? Would he love her? But for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of something she had almost forgotten, hope. Highgarden loomed on the horizon, a place that could finally offer her the life she deserved. It wasn't Winterfell, but it was a place where she could start anew. As the conversation continued around her, Sansa glanced at Robb one more time. He caught her gaze and smiled faintly, nodding. His expression was heavy with the burdens of leadership, but beneath it all was pride. He trusted her, and she trusted him. Highgarden, Sansa whispered to herself, the word tasting unfamiliar but sweet on her lips. A new chapter, a new future. For once, it didn't seem so terrifying. Chapter 30, Cersei 2. Chapter text. Cersei 2. Leave me, Cersei commanded sharply, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. The handmaids, who had been fussing over her for what felt like hours, exchanged quick glances before scurrying out of the chamber, leaving behind a trail of pins and fabric scraps. Cersei let out a frustrated breath, standing before the large mirror as she examined herself in the half-finished gown. This was the third fitting of her dress for Joffrey's wedding, a ceremony meant to cement her son's power and her house as the most powerful in the realm. Yet with every alteration, every adjustment, it felt like the dress was strangling her, as though the very fabric was conspiring to make her feel trapped. She swiped a hand over the silk, smoothing the folds that felt too tight, too suffocating. "How many changes can one dress have?" she muttered under her breath, turning slightly to inspect the golden embroidery. "Surely, they'll need to start again at this rate." The irony wasn't lost on her. It wasn't just the dress that was being altered over and over again, her entire world was shifting beneath her feet. Margaery Tyrell, that simpering girl, was already worming her way into her son's affections, and Cersei hated it. Joffrey was hers, her boy, her king. But there was no denying it. The moment Margaery walked down the aisle, her grip on Joffrey would tighten, and Cersei would be pushed further into the shadows. No longer the queen. Merely the queen mother, the dowager. Her jaw clenched as she thought of the young, clever Margaery, with her doe-eyed looks and sweet words that charmed even the coldest courtiers. She could feel the girl's ambition, lurking beneath every delicate curtsy, every carefully chosen word. The door creaked softly, breaking through the swirl of Cersei's turbulent thoughts. She didn't bother turning, her gaze fixed on her reflection, her expression hard. "I said leave me," she repeated, her voice cold and commanding, laced with impatience. There was a brief hesitation, then a voice, timid, uncertain, answered, I apologize, Your Grace." Cersei's eyes narrowed at the meekness in the tone. It wasn't one of her usual handmaids. Annoyance flickered across her features as she slowly turned to see a young girl standing just inside the door, her hands nervously clutching the hem of her dress. "But, your father has requested your presence," the girl stammered, her words spilling out in a hurried rush, her eyes wide with fear, as if she expected Cersei to lash out at any moment for daring to interrupt her solitude. Cersei's fingers twitched against the smooth fabric of her gown, her patience fraying. She had no desire to see anyone, least of all her father. But she knew that when Tywin Lannister called, it wasn't something she could ignore. She drew in a sharp breath, forcing herself to remain composed. "Very well," Cersei said, her voice clipped, leaving no room for further questions. She turned away from the mirror, her gaze piercing as she focused on the trembling girl in front of her. "Help me change." The girl's eyes widened further, and for a brief second, it looked as if she might bolt from the room. But she stepped forward, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the clasps of Cersei's gown. Cersei stood still, cold and statuesque, as the servant worked, her mind already elsewhere, on her father, on what he might want from her this time. It was always something. Tywin rarely summoned her unless it served some larger purpose, and Cersei knew that whatever this meeting was about, it wouldn't be anything small or insignificant. Her father dealt in power, in strategy, and Cersei had no intention of being blindsided. The girl's fingers faltered for a moment, causing the clasp of the gown to snag. Cersei's eyes flashed, a sharp warning glance that froze the young servant in place. "Careful," she said, her voice a dangerous whisper. "Apologies, Your Grace," the girl mumbled, her hands trembling even more as she continued her task, her movements quicker and more frantic now. When the girl finally finished, Cersei stepped away, dismissing her with a wave. "Leave," she commanded, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. The servant didn't need to be told twice. She scurried out of the room, leaving Cersei alone once more. With a steadying breath, Cersei glanced at her reflection one final time before heading toward the door. Whatever Tywin wanted from her, she would face it head-on. She always did. There were no weaknesses in her. Not anymore. Underscore. Cersei swept into the room, her gaze immediately falling on the familiar sight of her brothers already seated on either side of the long oak table. As always, her father, Tywin Lannister, sat at the head, his commanding presence filling the room before he even spoke. The air was thick with tension. It was the kind of tension Cersei had known all her life, the unspoken power Tywin wielded over them all. Jaime was back in his Kingsguard uniform, the pristine white cloak draped over his shoulders, a sharp contrast to the dark armor beneath. His golden hair, still slightly disheveled, framed his face, giving him an air of nobility despite the restless energy she could sense beneath his calm exterior. His sword, unsheathed, leaned casually against the table, the glint of steel catching the light from the windows. On the opposite side sat Tyrion, dressed in his usual red doublet embroidered with the proud golden lion of House Lannister. His sharp eyes tracked her movements as she entered, but he said nothing. The scar on his face from the Battle of Blackwater Bay had begun to heal, but the jagged line still marred his features. The wound, though mending, gave him a more hardened appearance, but it was his eyes, always calculating, always ready with a cutting remark, that spoke volumes. He seemed more guarded than usual, his lips pressed into a thin line, as though he too was waiting for the storm that Tywin would unleash. As Cersei approached, her gaze moved to her father, the man who had shaped all their lives with his iron will. Tywin Lannister sat as still as a statue, his eyes fixed on the papers before him, but Cersei knew better than to assume his attention was truly elsewhere. No, her father was always aware of every movement, every word, every subtle shift in power. Cersei sat down beside Jaime without waiting for an invitation, her posture rigid and her chin held high, determined not to reveal even the slightest hint of weakness in their presence. The silence stretched on for a beat too long, until Tywin finally set down the parchment he had been studying and raised his head. His cold, calculating gaze swept over his children, lingering for just a second longer on Cersei, as if he were weighing her more carefully than usual. She felt a familiar tightening in her chest. No matter how much she had accomplished or what lengths she had gone to for the family, it was never enough in her father's eyes. She was never enough. Cersei, Tywin began, his deep voice cutting through the silence like a blade. How kind of you to finally join us. It wasn't a question, nor an accusation, just a statement, heavy with the weight of his authority. I came the moment I was summoned, she responded, her tone icy and controlled, determined not to let him see how the subtle reprimand stung. Tywin said nothing, merely inclined his head, a small acknowledgement that seemed to dismiss the matter entirely. He folded his hands in front of him, his expression hardening as he prepared to address the real reason they were gathered. I have called you here today because there are matters of importance to discuss, matters that will shape the future of this family, and of the realm. Cersei's stomach churned. Her father's matters of importance rarely led to anything pleasant. She glanced at Jaime, who shifted slightly in his chair, his hand resting near his sword, as if anticipating a battle of a different sort. Tyrion, however, remained still, his eyes narrowing with interest. Tywin's eyes swept over each of his children, lingering on them in turn. Joffrey's wedding is fast approaching, and with it, new alliances must be secured. The Tyrells serve their purpose for now, but their loyalty is far from guaranteed. We cannot depend on them alone. His voice remained firm, calculating. There are other threats to consider. Stannis still lingers, the Ironborn grow more brazen in the north, and Myrcella's betrothal to House Martell may not be enough to placate the Dornish. Are we to be involved in yet another war, then? Tyrion asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Because the last one went so splendidly for all of us. Cersei shot Tyrion a sharp glare, but Tywin, unfazed, pressed on as if his youngest son hadn't spoken at all. What I require from each of you, Tywin continued, his voice cold and commanding, is absolute obedience. There can be no dissent, no reckless games. The crown sits on a precarious edge, and only through our unified strength can we ensure that it remains secure. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in the air. It is well past time for House Lannister to look to the future. The three of you have run unchecked for far too long, indulging your whims and desires. House Lannister needs an heir, a true legacy, to carry on our name and protect our interests. I will not live forever, and I refuse to leave our house vulnerable. Tyrion's eyes flashed with indignation, his voice rising in protest. You have an heir already, he exclaimed, his tone a mix of desperation and sarcasm. If you would just name me as your successor, I could restore our family's honor. Tywin's lips curled into a sardonic smile, a hint of amusement dancing in his cold grey eyes. Name you my heir, he said incredulously, shaking his head as though the thought were too absurd to fathom. Besides the obvious issues of your stature, you can't be trusted. You would turn our house into a laughingstock and Casterly Rock into a brothel. Tyrion's temper flared at the insult, his cheeks flushing with a blend of anger and embarrassment. I have achieved far more than you acknowledge, father. During my time as Hand A brief stint as Hand Tywine interrupted, his voice cutting through Tyrion's words like a dagger. All you managed to accomplish was to prevent the realm from completely unraveling. That hardly compensates for a lifetime of mockery and disgrace at your hands. Cersei let out a soft chuckle, her lips curling into a sly smile as she watched her father rebuke Tyrion with such authority. The satisfaction of seeing her brother humiliated filled her with a sense of delight. Tyrion had always believed he was entitled to the lordship, and witnessing Tywine dismantle that illusion was a sweet moment for her. Father Cersei interjected smoothly, her voice rich with confidence and conviction. This matter is quite simple. I've been blessed with 2 sons. Joffrey stands on the brink of his marriage, and soon he will have an heir of his own. Once that happens, you could easily name Tommen as your heir. Allow him to carry the Lannister name. She leaned slightly forward, her eyes glinting with determination, as if to emphasize her point. And give credence to the vile rumors surrounding the 2 of you. Tywine countered sharply, his expression unyielding as he gestured toward Jaime and Cersei. If I bestow the Lannister name upon that boy, it would be the spark that ignites a rebellion. The atmosphere grew heavy as Tywine's words settled among them, and Cersei felt a surge of frustration. The truth hung in the air like a thick fog. She knew their family was already steeped in scandal, but she also believed that their blood, the Lannister blood, would ultimately carry them through. She straightened her back, refusing to back down. Then what do you propose, father? Cersei shot back, her voice firm but smooth, like polished steel, cutting through the tension in the room. Her eyes locked onto Tywine's, determined to reveal any sign of hesitation in his resolve. Tywine's expression remained unyielding as he leaned forward, fingers steepled before him like a lion preparing to pounce. The king will announce that Jaime is retiring from the Kingsguard, he declared, each word heavy with authority. He will take his rightful place as my heir, as he should have done years ago. Furthermore, he will marry a suitable woman, someone who can help reinforce our standing in the realm. Cersei's heart raced, a mix of exhilaration and dread coursing through her veins. This was the kind of bold maneuver she had envisioned. Yet, the moment hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. I will do no such thing, Jaime interjected sharply, the fire of defiance igniting in his eyes. He shifted slightly in his chair, a deliberate motion that seemed to echo his displeasure. They already call me the Kingslayer. Do you want to add Oathbreaker to that? Is that the legacy you wish for House Lannister? His voice dripped with scorn as he spat out the words, each syllable tinged with bitterness. Enough. Tywine thundered, silencing both of them with a single word. The force of his presence sent a ripple of authority through the chamber, a storm of tension that could be felt in the air. He surveyed his children with a steely gaze, his expression a blend of disappointment and impatience. This is not about you or your pride, Jaime. This is about the future of our house. Cersei felt a wave of sickness wash over her, each word from her father like a dagger to her heart. Jaime was hers, her confidant, her protector, and the prospect of losing him filled her with dread. The very idea of being separated from him was unbearable, and she could feel her pulse quickening with anxiety. Jaime stood abruptly from the table, anger radiating from him like heat from a forge. I will not do this, father. His voice was filled with indignation, a raw edge that betrayed his mounting frustration. I swore an oath to protect the king and the royal family until my dying day. You cannot toss that aside because it's no longer convenient for you. He glanced at Cersei, desperation in his eyes, searching for understanding and support. Father, please, Tyrion said, his voice rising slightly above the tension in the room as he tried to interject before the argument escalated further. He cast a quick glance at Jaime, who still looked furious, and then returned his gaze to Tywine, striving for an air of calm amidst the chaos. Name me your heir. I will learn your ways, adapt to your demands. I will marry whichever woman you choose, without question. Tywine regarded him with an expression that was hard to decipher. Was it disdain, skepticism, or merely a calculation of the moment? You think I would simply grant you such a title because you ask nicely? Tywine's voice was cool, betraying no hint of his true feelings. Do you think your charm and empty promises can replace the years of foolishness and mistakes you've made? Perhaps not, but I am willing to change. Tyrion pressed on, a note of desperation creeping into his tone. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his hands steepled beneath his chin. I have fought tooth and nail to keep the realm from tearing itself apart. I am no stranger to hard decisions or compromise, father. If you give me the chance to prove myself as heir, I promise to be the man you need me to be. A flicker of interest sparked in Tywin's eyes, though he masked it quickly, his expression as impassive as ever. And what assurance do I have that you won't turn this house into a laughingstock, he countered, his gaze unyielding. What proof can you offer that you won't squander our legacy as you have so often squandered your opportunities? Tyrion felt the weight of his father's scrutiny pressing down on him like a heavy mantle, one he had worn too long and too often. The room seemed to constrict around him, every breath a reminder of his father's relentless expectations. He inhaled deeply, steadying himself before replying. When the time comes, if I haven't produced an heir with a suitable wife, I will step aside. Jaime can take my place as heir. His words hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples of his statement drawing the attention of both Jaime and Cersei, each processing the gravity of what he proposed. Jaime will lay aside his Kingsguard cloak and assume the mantle of Lord of Casterly Rock. He will marry a woman of suitable standing, and I will simply disappear. The suggestion hung between them, laden with unspoken consequences. Jaime's expression shifted from anger to disbelief, his brow furrowing as he processed what his brother had just offered. You would just walk away, he asked, his voice low, a mix of concern and incredulity. You would abandon our house to live in obscurity. You think that would bring us honor? Honor? Tyrion scoffed, his voice laced with bitterness. Honor means very little when you're perpetually reminded of your failures. And if we're being honest here, there's one failure I can never rectify. I can't change who I am or what I am, but I do care deeply for our family. If I cannot become the man our family needs me to be, then I will step aside without hesitation. Jaime? Cersei asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Jaime glanced at Tyrion, searching for reassurance in his brother's eyes. Tyrion met his gaze and gave a subtle nod, urging him to speak. I agree, Jaime said, his voice steady but uncertain. If Tyrion fails to produce a suitable heir, I will hang up my cloak and take my place as the heir to Casterly Rock. Tywin sat back in his chair, silence enveloping the room as he weighed the proposal. The air was thick with tension, every eye fixed on him, waiting for his response. After a long pause, he finally spoke. Fine, but let me be clear, I am not a young man, and my patience is running thin. Tyrion will marry and must produce an heir within the next year. If he does not, or if I still harbor doubts about his ability to lead our house with the dignity it deserves, he will step aside. But, Jaime and Tyrion both started to protest, the weight of their father's ultimatum heavy on their shoulders. No. Tywin cut them off, his voice sharp and final, echoing in the chamber. This is non-negotiable. This is my final offer. He fixed each of them with a steely glare, making it abundantly clear that any further objections would be futile. The room fell into a tense silence, the air charged with unspoken fears and uncertainties about the future of House Lannister. Cersei leaned forward, her interest piqued despite the gravity of the situation. Father, do you truly believe you can find a suitable match for him so quickly? He'll be lucky to find someone willing to marry him at all. Her voice was laced with a mix of disdain and concern, and she relished the discomfort in Tyrion's expression. Tyrion shot her a sharp look. It's a pity you're not more supportive of your brother, Cersei. I'd have thought family would count for something. His words dripped with sarcasm, but he felt the sting of her words. Tywin silenced them with a curt wave of his hand, the room falling into an uneasy stillness. His cold eyes swept over each of them before resting on Tyrion. Enough bickering. This isn't a game. We are discussing the future of our house. The weight of his words hung in the air as Tywin continued, his voice low but commanding. Sansa Stark remains the most eligible lady in the realm, and yet I hear the Tyrells are scheming to steal her from us. They plan to marry her to their crippled heir, Willers. Tyrion raised an eyebrow, the notion already unsettling. Robb Stark would never hand his sister over to us willingly, and besides, the Tyrells are our best chance to finally end this war. Refusing them this marriage could cost us more than we're prepared to lose in this war. Tywin's lips thinned into a grim smile. There is nothing to refuse yet. The Tyrells are playing a clever game, one they won't unveil until after Joffrey's wedding. But we will not sit idly by and wait for them to move. We will strike first, kill this union before it takes root. You can't be serious, Tyrion said, shaking his head, incredulous. Marrying me to the Stark girl after everything she suffered at Joffrey's hands. The poor girl's been through hell. That would be cruel, even for you. Tywin's gaze was unwavering. And do you plan on mistreating her? His tone held no emotion, no sympathy. The girl's happiness is not my concern, nor should it be yours. Your duty is to this family, and she is the key to securing the Northern Alliance. She's a child. Tyrion's voice rose with anger, feeling the unfairness and weight of it all. She has flowered, Cersei interjected, her voice cool and indifferent. Sansa and I have spoken about it. She is a good match, Tyrion. You should be grateful for the opportunity. Tyrion's stomach twisted at the thought, his mind racing. Grateful? For this? Marrying a girl who has already suffered more than enough at the hands of our family? No. Give me someone else, someone who doesn't hate me. A Westerling girl, perhaps. I hear that their daughter Jane is fair, and would do perfectly fine. Cersei snorted with derision. You should be thanking the gods, brother. This is more than you deserve. Tywin cut through their squabbling like a blade. Tyrion will do as he is commanded. He will go to Robb Stark and convince him of the merits of this union. He will wed the Stark girl, bed her, and put a child in her belly before the end of next year. Surely even you are capable of that. Tyrion opened his mouth to protest further, but Tywin's icy glare stopped him short. Then, Tywin turned his gaze toward Cersei, and the room seemed to shift, the tension growing. As for you, Tywin said, his voice growing colder, sharper, you will marry Willers Tyrell. Father, Jaime started, his protest immediate. Cersei's face paled, all the blood draining from her cheeks. Her voice wavered, though she fought to maintain her composure. I will not. You will. Tywin's voice was iron, unmoving. The boy is heir to Highgarden, and if we are to take Sansa Stark from the Tyrells, we must offer them something in return. You will secure the Reach, just as Tyrion will secure the North. Cersei's fists clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. I am the Queen Regent. I will not be traded off like some broodmare to please the Tyrells. You are my daughter. Tywin thundered, slamming both fists down on the table with enough force to make the wood groan under the impact. And you will do as I command. You will marry Willers Tyrell and finally put to rest the vile rumors about you and Jaime. The room went deathly silent. Cersei's eyes flickered toward Jaime, who remained silent, his face tight with unease. Father, please, Cersei said, her voice breaking for the first time, the icy veneer cracking. Don't make me do this again. Don't make me. Not another word. Tywin's voice was final, his authority unshakable. You will do your duty to this family, both of you, he said, his gaze moving between his children. My children. You've disgraced the Lannister name for too long, all of you. Cersei felt the ground slip from beneath her, the sickening realization of her father's iron will crushing any hope of rebellion. Jaime, for once, had nothing to say, no sharp retort or clever deflection. The weight of Tywin's command hung over them all, suffocating. For Tyrion, the enormity of what was being asked of him settled like a stone in his chest. Marrying Sansa, convincing Robb Stark, it all seemed like a hopeless endeavor, but Tywin had left no room for negotiation. As Tywin turned to leave, his back straight and resolute, he added one final command without turning around. It ends today. And with that, he strode out of the room, leaving his children behind, their futures no longer in their own hands. Chapter 31, Roslyn 12. Notes. /N, warning for mentions of Sa in this chapter. It's not explicit in detail and is spoken about after the fact. Chapter text. Roslyn 12. What about Jory? Robb suggested, his hand gently stroking Roslyn's hair, his touch tender as always. His gaze was soft as he looked down at her, lost in thought. They had found a quiet spot deep within the palace gardens, away from prying eyes and the endless demands of court life. The secluded bench had become their sanctuary, tucked among blooming rose bushes and ancient trees, where the scent of flowers mixed with the warmth of the sun. They had been there for hours, basking in the tranquility of the afternoon. Roslyn lay sprawled out on the bench, her head resting in Rob's lap, eyes half closed as she soaked in the sun. The peace they found here was rare, and both savored it. "Why are you so certain it's a boy?" Roslyn asked with a soft chuckle, opening her eyes and tilting her head to look up at him. Rob smiled, his thumb gently tracing lazy circles on her shoulder. "I can tell already," he said with a playful gleam in his eye. "The way he kicks, strong, like a future lord of Winterfell. And Jory, that's a strong name." Roslyn smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling with amusement. "And what if, gods forbid, it is a girl?" she teased, raising an eyebrow. "I don't think she'd appreciate being named Jory." Rob chuckled, his laughter warm and genuine. "All right, you may have a point," he conceded, leaning back against the bench as the sun dappled through the leaves overhead. "But if it's a girl, what would we call her, then?" "Lyanna, perhaps. Or maybe something softer, like Bethany." His voice softened as he spoke the names, as if the thought of having a daughter touched something deep within him. Roslyn smiled at the tenderness in his tone, reaching up to brush a stray lock of his auburn hair from his face. "Bethany," she repeated, her eyes meeting his with a quiet, surprised warmth. "After my mother." Rob looked down at her, his expression earnest. "Yes," he said, gently running his fingers through her hair. "She gave you so much love, so much of who you are, Roslyn. It would be an honor to name our daughter after her." Roslyn's heart swelled at his words, and for a moment, she was silent, her gaze drifting to the blooming flowers surrounding them. "I think she would have liked that," she murmured softly. Rob leaned down, pressing a tender kiss to Roslyn's forehead, his lips brushing softly against her skin. "Then Bethany it is," he whispered, the warmth of his voice a gentle murmur against the calm of the garden. "A strong name for a little girl who'll have all the love we can give her." His hand rested protectively on her belly, and a faint, almost mischievous smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "But I still think it's a boy." Roslyn smiled up at him, her hand covering his as they shared a quiet moment of hope and joy, imagining their future child. But just as she opened her mouth to tease him further, a voice from the path cut through the tranquility like a knife through silk. "Lord Stark," came the call, its tone polite but far too familiar, too unwelcome for the serenity of the afternoon. "Lady Stark, how fortunate I am to come across you." Roslyn stiffened at the sound, her fingers curling instinctively into Rob's sleeve as she turned her head toward the source of the voice. Her contentment shattered the moment her eyes locked onto the figure striding toward them. Joffrey approached with his ever-present arrogance, a twisted smile playing on his lips. His arm was linked with Margaery Tyrell, her beauty radiant beside him, but the sight of Joffrey soured any comfort the scene might have brought. Roslyn's heart sank, her earlier joy evaporating like mist under the morning sun. The pleasant warmth of the garden seemed to fade as if winter had suddenly descended. She forced herself to sit up, instinctively moving closer to Rob, her protector, her anchor. Joffrey's mere presence was enough to turn the air cold, the garden no longer a haven but a stage for a confrontation. Rob's jaw tightened at the sight of Joffrey, the light in his eyes dimming as his gaze hardened. "Your Grace, my lady," Rob greeted, his voice steady but laced with the tension of a wolf ready to defend its pack. Joffrey's smirk widened as he took in the scene before him. "Ah, don't let me interrupt," he said, his words dripping with insincerity. "You both looked so comfortable." Margaery offered a graceful nod, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She glanced between Rob and Roslyn with the practiced ease of someone used to navigating dangerous waters. "It's lovely to see you both," she added, her voice smooth and honeyed, though a flicker of concern passed over her face as her gaze lingered on Roslyn. Rob's arm tightened around Roslyn's waist, his protective instincts kicking in as he kept his eyes fixed on Joffrey. "What brings you here?" Rob asked, his tone sharp but controlled, as though he were speaking to a dangerous animal that might lash out at any moment. "Oh, I was simply enjoying a stroll with my betrothed," Joffrey said, the words thick with pride, as if he needed to remind them all of his impending marriage. His gaze flicked to Roslyn, a cruel glint dancing in his eyes. "I couldn't help but notice how lovely Lady Stark looks today. Motherhood seems to suit you." Roslyn swallowed hard, her hand gripping Rob's arm even tighter. She refused to let Joffrey see her fear, though the effort of keeping her composure in his presence felt like an unbearable weight pressing down on her chest. "Thank you, Your Grace," she managed to say, her voice quieter than she intended. Joffrey's smirk twisted into something darker. "Perhaps one day, I'll have children of my own, wouldn't that be something?" he said, casting a sidelong glance at Margaery, who remained composed, though her smile faltered for the briefest of moments. Robb's eyes darkened. "You and Lady Margaery will no doubt have many heirs," he said, his words polite but edged with a warning. "Indeed," Joffrey said, clearly enjoying the unease his presence caused. He let his gaze wander back to Roslyn, lingering for just a moment too long. "Though I can't imagine how dreadful it must be to carry such a burden in the middle of a war, especially when you were without your lord husband for so long." Robb's patience snapped, though his tone remained dangerously calm. "My wife carries no burden, Your Grace." Joffrey's eyes flashed with annoyance, but before he could retort, Margaery interjected smoothly, her voice as soothing as a cool breeze. "We mustn't intrude on their time, my love. Lord and Lady Stark deserve their peace, don't you agree?" Joffrey's smirk faltered, just for an instant, before he quickly regained his composure. For a fleeting moment, Margaery's calming presence seemed to temper his need to provoke further. "Of course, my dear," he purred, lifting Margaery's hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to her fingers, his gaze never leaving Robb. The gesture was charming enough on the surface, but beneath it, there was a cold calculation in his eyes. Then, Joffrey's voice brightened with a sudden burst of excitement, as if a new game had come to mind. "You've reminded me of something, love." Margaery smiled, ever poised, though her eyes flicked warily between Joffrey and Robb. "And what might that be, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice as gentle as a breeze. "Shall we return to your chambers to discuss it?" "No need," Joffrey replied, the cruel glint in his eyes returning. "This concerns Lord Stark as well." He shifted his attention to Robb, a twisted pleasure dancing in his gaze as he delivered the news. "I have offered your brother Willers a position on my small council." Roslyn stiffened beside Robb, her heart sinking as dread washed over her. She knew exactly what this was, Joffrey's move in a deadly game of chess. He had heard of the Tyrell's interest in Sansa, and now he was positioning himself to keep her in King's Landing. Robb's brow furrowed, his lips pressing into a tight line, but he remained silent, waiting for Joffrey to continue. "You've spoken so highly of him, my love," Joffrey said, his voice almost sweet as he looked at Margaery. "How clever and capable Willers is. And as it happens, I am in need of a new master of coin." He let the words hang in the air for a moment, savoring the tension. Roslyn's mind raced, and before she could stop herself, the question tumbled from her lips. "But what of Lord Tyrion?" she asked, her voice betraying the worry she felt. Joffrey turned to her with a thin smile, his eyes gleaming with malice. "My uncle will no longer be serving on the council after my wedding," he said, with a casual shrug, as though dismissing Tyrion's future entirely. "It seems my grandfather has named him his heir and wishes for him to return to Casterly Rock." Roslyn's heart skipped a beat. Tywin naming Tyrion his heir? It seemed impossible. The Lannister patriarch had never shown anything but disdain for Tyrion. Yet, Joffrey's smirk told her there was more to the story, there always was with the Lannisters. Joffrey turned back to Margaery, a gleam of pride in his voice as he continued, "I thought you'd be pleased, my love. You've spoken so much about missing Highgarden. Now, I've brought a piece of Highgarden here for you." His tone softened, an almost sickening sweetness in it, as if he were offering her a gift instead of a ploy. "This way, you can continue building your friendship with Lady Sansa once she and Willers are wed." Or, his smirk deepened, his gaze flicking briefly to Robb and then back to Margaery. "Was I not supposed to know about that?" Margaery's expression remained perfectly composed, but the tightening of her grip on Joffrey's arm betrayed her unease. She smiled politely, though the air between them crackled with tension. "We had hoped to share the news with you at a more appropriate time, Your Grace," she said, her voice as smooth as silk. "I'm certain Lord Willers will be honored by your offer." Robb's silence was thick with barely restrained anger. His jaw clenched as he watched Joffrey play his games, his mind undoubtedly racing with the implications of the Tyrell's alliance growing stronger within the court. Roslyn could feel the tension radiating from him, a storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. Joffrey, sensing the unease he'd created, seemed to revel in it. I thought as much, he said, his grin widening as he turned to face Robb fully. And you, Lord Stark? Surely you must be pleased that your sister will be well cared for. A match with House Tyrell is a strong one, after all. Robb's icy blue eyes met Joffrey's, his face impassive though fury simmered beneath the surface. I'm sure Sansa's happiness is of great concern to you, Your Grace, he said, his voice low but steady. As it is to me. The words were laced with a warning, but Joffrey only smiled wider, leaning in ever so slightly as if testing how far he could push. Of course. We all want what's best for Lady Sansa, don't we? His gaze lingered on Robb for a moment longer before he straightened, returning his attention to Margaery. Come, my love. Let us leave the Starks to their peace. With that, Joffrey turned on his heel, leading Margaery away, his laughter echoing faintly through the garden. As they disappeared from view, Roslyn let out a shaky breath, her grip still tight on Robb's arm. I don't trust him, she whispered, her voice barely audible as the weight of Joffrey's words hung heavy between them. Robb's eyes remained fixed on the path where Joffrey had gone, his jaw still clenched. Neither do I, he replied, his voice as cold as the northern winds. And I never will. It was early evening when Roslyn finally returned to her chambers, the sun dipping low in the sky and casting long shadows through the castle corridors. She closed the door softly behind her, leaning against it for a moment as she tried to catch her breath. Robb had decided to train this evening, a routine he had adopted more frequently as their time in the capital dragged on. He claimed it was to maintain his edge, but Roslyn suspected it was more of a necessary outlet for his pent-up energy and anxiety. With so much weighing on his shoulders, she knew that keeping physically active helped him to clear his mind, if only temporarily. He would never voice it outright, but she could see the flicker of fear in his eyes during their more intimate moments, the way his brow would furrow slightly when he thought she wasn't looking. Robb was terrified of the future, and it weighed heavily on him. He often spoke of his worries about the Northerners' acceptance of him when they returned to Winterfell. Would they still see him as their rightful lord? Would they trust his leadership after everything that had transpired? Those thoughts gnawed at him like a persistent itch he couldn't quite reach, and Roslyn felt helpless in the face of such uncertainty. Then there was the matter of their child, who would soon be brought into a world fraught with danger. Would he be strong enough to protect them both? Could he truly live up to the mantle of a father when there were battles to fight and enemies to outwit? She made her way to the small table in her chamber, where she had left some embroidery projects. Picking up the delicate fabric, she started to work on a piece for their baby, threading vibrant colors into the fabric with each stitch. It was a small comfort, a tangible reminder that amidst all the chaos, they were creating something beautiful. Roslyn was engrossed in her embroidery, the rhythmic movement of the needle soothing her racing thoughts, when a piercing scream shattered the evening's tranquility. Roslyn! Robb! The urgency in Sansa's voice propelled her from her seat, her heart racing as she hurried toward the sound. Bursting into the corridor, Roslyn found Sansa stumbling towards her, panic etched across her face. The sight was jarring. The young girl's dress was torn, its delicate fabric hanging in tatters, and a vivid red mark marred her cheek, a stark contrast to her pale skin. Roslyn's heart clenched at the sight. Without a moment's hesitation, Sansa spotted her and bolted forward, throwing herself into Roslyn's waiting arms. The force of the embrace nearly knocked Roslyn off her feet, but she quickly steadied them both, wrapping her arms tightly around Sansa as if to shield her from whatever horrors lay outside. Sure, it's all right, Sansa, Roslyn murmured softly, stroking the girl's hair as she tried to calm her racing heart. You're safe now. Sansa's breath came in rapid bursts, her body trembling against Roslyn's. She gasped between sobs, I didn't mean to be in the way. Roslyn's chest tightened as she realized the implications of Sansa's words. Who? She asked, concern lacing her voice as she scanned the corridor for any signs of danger. What happened? Joffrey. I didn't mean to run into him, but he and I didn't mean to. Sansa's words tumbled out in a rush, her distress evident as her voice quivered with fear. Roslyn's protective instincts kicked in. Come on, we need to get you inside. With one hand gently guiding Sansa, she maneuvered the two of them into her chambers, shutting the door behind them with a firm click. The heavy oak door felt like a barrier against the world outside, a temporary sanctuary from the cruelty that lurked in the shadows. Sangza, I need you to be very clear with me, Rosalind said gently, but firmly, as Sangza's sobs echoed in the room. I know you're scared, but please, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Did he hurt you? Rosalind's heart raced as she recalled her own terrifying encounter with Joffrey. She could still feel the weight of him pinning her down, the suffocating fear that had gripped her when Tyrion had intervened just in time. The thought of that nightmare happening to Sangza made her stomach churn. She prayed that Joffrey hadn't succeeded with Sangza, where he'd failed with her. At first, he was kind, at least for Joffrey. Sangza began, her voice shaky as memories tumbled back, dark and tumultuous. He congratulated me on my betrothal and then he... Rosalind leaned closer, her heart pounding as she sensed the weight of Sangza's hesitation. What did he say, Sangza? You can tell me. Sangza took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she gripped Rosalind's tightly. He asked me if I was doing it on purpose, playing with him on purpose, she whispered, her voice wavering. He said that he wanted me, and every time he saw me, he thought about... Sangza couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Rosalind knew exactly what he had said because Joffrey had said the same thing to her only a few months ago. A wave of protective anger surged within her. Sangza continued, her voice trembling as she spoke. He told me that he was going to keep me in King's Landing, that Willers wouldn't be able to protect me, nobody would. Tears streamed down her face, each drop a testament to the fear and despair that threatened to swallow her whole. She struggled to keep her composure as she continued, then he said that on my wedding night, he would come to me first before Willers, that he would put his bastard in my belly, and that I would always be his. The cruel weight of his words hung in the air, chilling Rosalind to the bone. Sangza's gaze dropped, the despair settling heavily on her shoulders. Then he kissed me, she said through sobs, her voice breaking. I pushed him away, but that's when he hit me. He called me a whore. Each word dripped with pain, and Rosalind felt her heart shatter for her friend. And then he said he'd changed his mind, Sangza continued, her voice trembling as fresh tears streamed down her cheeks. He said he didn't want to wait. The weight of her words hung heavily in the air, a leaden shroud that suffocated the fragile sense of safety they had shared just moments before. Rosalind felt a wave of sickness wash over her, her stomach churning as she braced herself for what was to come. She could already anticipate the dark turn the conversation was taking, and the terror in Sangza's eyes mirrored her own growing dread. He dragged me into his room, tore my dress, Sangza's voice faltered, and for a moment, she seemed to retreat into herself, struggling against the memories that threatened to overwhelm her. I tried to stop him, but her words broke off, the emotion choking her as she buried her face in her hands, unable to finish the sentence. Rosalind reached out, pulling Sangza into a tight embrace, feeling the tremors of her body against her own. She could sense the horror that Sangza had endured, and each shuddering breath her friend took was a reminder of the fragility of their situation. It's all right, Rosalind murmured, her own heart pounding in her chest. You're safe now. You're with me. Sangza leaned into her, seeking comfort in her warmth. But the weight of her words was heavy, and as she spoke, Rosalind felt her heart sink further. And then when he was finished, Sangza managed to choke out, her voice barely a whisper, he said no one would want me now, and that if I was lucky, I'd be carrying his child, and I should pray that I am. The cruelty in Joffrey's words cut through the air like a knife, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Rosalind felt a wave of rage and protectiveness swell within her, mingling with her sorrow for her friend. She tightened her grip on Sangza, as if by sheer will, she could shield her from the lingering shadows of what had just happened. She held Sangza tighter, whispering reassurances while her mind raced, plotting ways to protect her friend from the monster lurking in the castle's shadows. We'll figure this out, I promise, she vowed, determination fueling her resolve. You're not alone in this, Sangza. I won't let him hurt you again. Then the doors to the room swung open with a loud bang that made both girls flinch. Robb stood in the doorway, breathless and clearly alarmed. He must have heard their cries echoing through the halls. As he took in the sight before him, Sangza and Rosalind huddled on the floor, rocking back and forth, faces streaked with tears. His expression shifted from confusion to concern. What's happened? He asked, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. Chapter 32, Rosalind 13. Chapter text. Rosalind 13. I'll kill him. Robb screamed, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the chamber, eyes blazing with a mix of rage and protectiveness. The sight before him, the two girls huddled together on the floor, Sangza's tear-streaked face buried in Rosalind's shoulder, shattered any semblance of calm he had managed to maintain. He felt as if the very air had thickened with the weight of his fury. "Rob, please," Rosalind implored, lifting her head to meet his gaze, her expression a mix of fear and pleading. "You can't. No. He can't get away with this." Rob's fists clenched at his sides, his knuckles whitening as he struggled to contain the tempest brewing inside him. The thought of Joffrey laying hands on Sangza sent a wave of heat through him, igniting the instinct to protect those he loved. "He's a monster, and I'm going to tear him apart." "Rob!" Rosalind shouted, her voice sharp and urgent as she cut through his mounting fury. "Not now." She gestured toward Sangza, who was shaking in her arms, tears streaming down her cheeks like a river of anguish. The sight of his sister's pain snapped Rob back to the reality of the moment. His expression shifted from rage to concern as he dropped to his knees beside them, his heart aching at the sight of Sangza in such distress. "Oh, Sangza," he said softly, his voice trembling with empathy and sorrow. He reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry." Sangza looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with fear and confusion. "Rob, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, but the words tangled in her throat as she struggled to express the enormity of what had just happened. "Sure, it's okay," he soothed, shifting closer to wrap his arms around her, careful not to overwhelm her with his presence. "You're safe now. I promise you're safe." He could feel the tremors of her body against his, the sobs racking her frame, and it tore at his heart. Sangza's voice trembled as she whispered, "Rob, you can't do anything. I don't want you to get hurt. You can't fight him. He's the king." "Kings be damned," he shot back. "I don't care about his title. He's a coward, hiding behind his crown. I'll make him regret ever laying a finger on you." Rosalind moved closer to Sangza, her hand resting protectively on her back. "Rob, listen to me," she said, her voice steadying as she looked into his eyes. "If you confront Joffrey, he'll have your head. We need to think this through." "Think?" Rob spat, pacing the floor like a caged animal, his frustration boiling over. His fists clenched at his sides, and the fury in his voice was unmistakable. "How can I think when he's done this to her?" His gaze flickered back to Sangza, a deep sorrow filling his eyes. "Sangza, I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I wish I could have protected you from him, from all of this." Sangza didn't respond, her tears having dried for the moment, but her hollow gaze was enough to send a fresh wave of guilt crashing over Rob. He knelt in front of her, his hand hovering over hers, as if afraid his touch would hurt her more. "Sangza," Rosalind said softly, kneeling beside her, her voice gentle yet firm. "I'm so sorry to even bring this up right now, but there are some things we need to take care of." She glanced at Rob, whose face was contorted with a mixture of rage and helplessness, before turning her attention back to Sangza. "First, let's get you cleaned up. A nice hot bath, fresh clothes, you'll feel better after that, I promise." Sangza gave a weak nod, her body still trembling, but her eyes told Rosalind she was barely holding on. Rosalind's hand reached up, brushing a few tangled strands of hair away from Sangza's face. And then she continued gently, "You'll need to drink some moon tea." Sangza blinked, her brows knitting together in confusion. "Moon tea?" Her voice was quiet, fragile, as if she couldn't even fathom what that meant right now. Rosalind stroked her hair, trying to comfort her. "It's a kind of medicine," she explained softly. "You'll take some tonight, and then again in a few days." "It's just to make sure that he hasn't." Rosalind hesitated, her heart breaking at having to say the words aloud. Rob winced, he stood and walked away sharply. His jaw clenched so tight it ached, his mind screaming with fury, but he forced himself to stay silent. He couldn't look at Sangza right now, not like this. His hands shook with the rage he was trying to suppress, anger at Joffrey, at himself, at the world for allowing this to happen. Rosalind swallowed hard, trying to remain steady for Sangza's sake. "It'll make sure that he hasn't gotten you with child," she finished, her voice thick with the weight of the truth. Sangza's face contorted in anguish, her fragile composure shattering with every second that passed. Her lower lip trembled, and her eyes squeezed shut as if closing them would block out the horrors she had endured. The mere thought of carrying Joffrey's child, of having that monster's blood in her, was too overwhelming to bear. Silent sobs racked her body, shaking her frail frame, and the tears came harder, streaking down her pale cheeks like rain down a broken window. Roslin held her tighter, but nothing could stop the storm inside Sansa now. Through her sobs, Sansa's voice broke, soft and filled with despair. But Willers, the Tyrells, her words were barely audible, tinged with a kind of helpless resignation that tore at Rob's heart. They won't want me now. He's ruined it. He's ruined me. The weight of those words hung in the air like a leaden cloud. Roslin felt them too, the devastation in Sansa's admission slicing through her like a knife. She couldn't find words to reassure her, not when the truth of what Joffrey had done was so clear, so painful. Robb, kneeling before them, clenched his fists tighter. His knuckles were white, his body stiff with the rage he was barely holding back. Hearing Sansa's broken words, the rawness of her shame and fear, was worse than anything he'd imagined. His sister was shattered, stripped of her dignity by the cruelty of that vile boy king. He had always known Joffrey was a monster, but this was beyond unforgivable. No, Sansa, Robb said, his voice rough and strained as he tried to steady it. He forced himself to speak, to reach out to her through the thick fog of his own anger. He hasn't ruined you. He doesn't have the power to do that. No one does. His voice softened as he continued. You're still you, Sansa Stark, my sister. And no matter what Joffrey has done, or tried to do, you are not ruined. But Sansa only shook her head, her voice wavering. How could he? How could anyone see me as anything but tainted? Joffrey, he said no one would want me now. Her hands trembled as they rested in her lap, her fingers twisting the torn fabric of her dress, as if she could still feel the phantom touch of Joffrey's violence. Roslin's heart broke for her. Sansa, listen to me, she said firmly, her voice filled with compassion and urgency. Joffrey is wrong. So wrong. You're still strong, still noble, still the beautiful girl who has survived so much. You're not tainted. Don't let his poison take that away from you. Robb's jaw clenched again, his throat tightening with unshed tears. Sansa, I swear to you, we'll make this right. You'll have the life you deserve, with or without Willers Tyrell. And Joffrey, he'll pay for what he's done. That, I promise. Sansa's watery gaze flickered toward Robb, her lips parting as if she wanted to believe him, but the hurt ran too deep. Still, she nodded slowly, though it was more out of exhaustion than belief. Her body sagged against Roslin's, as if the weight of the world had finally become too much to carry. Roslin wiped away Sansa's tears with the hem of her own sleeve, her voice gentle yet firm. We'll take it one step at a time. Right now, the only thing you need to worry about is resting, healing. She turned to Robb. We'll get her out of here, Robb. Away from all of this. Robb nodded, his heart aching for his sister. Whatever it takes. You won't stay in this nightmare, Sansa. We'll keep you safe. I'll keep you safe. But as Robb looked down at Sansa, who seemed so small and fragile in that moment, a fresh wave of fury surged through him. He swore to himself, Joffrey Baratheon would pay dearly. Whatever the cost, he would make sure his sister never suffered under that monster's shadow again. __________. The next morning arrived after a restless night. Roslin had barely slept, lying beside Sansa as the poor girl finally drifted into a fitful slumber, her body still trembling even in sleep. Roslin held her close, whispering gentle reassurances, though her own mind churned with worry. Robb had left earlier, slipping out to find the most discreet yet trustworthy maester he could to procure the moon tea. The silence in the castle that night had felt oppressive, heavy with the weight of what had happened, and both Robb and Roslin knew their every move now had to be carefully measured. When morning finally broke, casting a pale light through the windows, Robb returned, his expression grim. He sat beside the bed, watching Sansa sleep for a moment, before turning to Roslin. We need to keep things normal, he murmured quietly, so as not to wake her. We can't draw attention to ourselves until we've decided what to do next. Roslin nodded, though she knew maintaining normalcy was going to be harder than either of them wanted to admit. They couldn't simply flee King's Landing as much as the thought tempted them. The political implications of such a move were too great. If they left, they would lose all influence in the court, and worse, they would paint a target on their backs. They needed to move carefully, strategically. "I need to talk to you," Rosalind whispered, her voice strained with the weight of the conversation they couldn't yet have. "But not in front of Sansa. There are things we need to consider." Robb nodded, his jaw tight. "I'll make sure she's taken care of. You go do what you need to, and we'll talk later." Robb made the decision to spend the entire day with Sansa, refusing to leave her side. As Rosalind watched them leave their chambers together, she couldn't shake the deep worry that gnawed at her. Robb looked pale, his face drawn and haunted by everything that had happened. The weight of his emotions was clear in his every step, and Rosalind's heart ached as she feared for both of them, not just for Sansa, but for Robb, too. For Rosalind, keeping up her normal routine meant breaking her fast with Tyrion Lannister. It was something she did once a week, a quiet, private meal where they discussed the happenings of the realm, shared news, and, on occasion, simply sat in silence together. Tyrion, despite his family name, had become something of an unlikely friend. He was sharp, honest in a way few in court were, and more than anything, he seemed to genuinely appreciate the rare company of someone who treated him as more than just the imp. Robb hadn't always been fond of her friendship with Tyrion, however Rosalind knew this connection could be valuable, especially now. Tyrion was close to power, close to the Lannisters who held the kingdom in their grip, and more than that, he was smart. If anyone could help navigate the dangerous waters they found themselves in, it was him. Rosalind slipped out of the room, her thoughts racing as she made her way through the halls. The morning air was crisp, but it did little to soothe the tension that knotted in her stomach. She would have to act like everything was fine, that nothing had changed, when in reality, their entire world had been tipped on its axis. As she approached the small dining chamber where she and Tyrion typically met, she steeled herself. Tyrion was already there, sipping from a goblet of wine, his sharp eyes glinting in the early morning light. He looked up as Rosalind entered, his mouth twitching into a faint smile. "Ah, Lady Rosalind," he greeted, his tone light but his gaze ever observant. "You look as though the weight of the world rests on your shoulders this morning. Bad dreams, or something more tangible?" Rosalind forced a small smile, though the strain of the last night tugged at her features. "Something more tangible, I'm afraid," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "But we all have our burdens, don't we?" Tyrion leaned forward, his tone unusually somber. "I fear today will be no easier for you, my lady. My nephew has already started his tirades this morning." Rosalind's stomach twisted. No matter what cruelty Joffrey had unleashed today, she knew it would pale in comparison to what he had done the previous evening. "Is that so?" Rosalind asked, trying her best to maintain her composure, though her heart pounded in her chest. "Unfortunately, yes," Tyrion replied with a sigh. He was overheard telling one of his Kingsguard that after the wedding, Lady Sansa would need new chambers because she would be taking on a new position as his official mistress. Rosalind's breath hitched, the sick feeling deepening as Tyrion spoke. Joffrey's vile nature seemed to know no bounds, and hearing it out loud from someone else felt like another dagger in her chest. Tyrion continued, his sharp eyes studying her closely. "Ridiculous, of course. But this kind of talk is dangerous, and we should act swiftly to squash it before the rumors grow legs of their own." Rosalind shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her posture betraying the calm mask she was struggling to keep in place. Tyrion's gaze narrowed slightly, catching the change in her demeanor. "Unless," Tyrion hesitated, his expression darkening as a newfound seriousness crept into his voice. "My lady, is there some truth to what he says? Has something happened?" Rosalind's face drained of color. She averted her gaze, unable to hold Tyrion's penetrating stare. Her hands, which usually sat composed in her lap, now trembled slightly, betraying the storm brewing inside her. Speaking the unspeakable, revealing the horror that had befallen Sansa, felt like solidifying it, like letting the nightmare become more real, more dangerous. But Tyrion was sharp, and he wouldn't let this go unnoticed. Still, admitting it out loud was no small thing. Rosalind's voice faltered, her breath hitching. She looked back at Tyrion, whose sharp eyes softened, betraying an unexpected compassion. That flicker of understanding eased her fears, though it did little to quiet the pounding in her chest. She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper as she continued. My lord, I've come to see you as a friend, a true friend, and what I'm about to tell you, I say only because I trust you with all my heart. If I have misplaced that trust, if you betray me or Sangza, her voice caught, the weight of her words overwhelming her. She's just a girl, Tyrion. Please, before you do anything, think of her future. We need help, but we cannot afford rash decisions. Tyrion's brows knitted together, his expression one of sincere concern. He slowly reached across the table, his hand hovering for a moment before resting gently atop hers. My lady, he said softly, his voice taking on a rare tone of warmth, you have nothing to fear from me. I have no love for my nephew, and whatever that wretched boy has done, I swear to you, I may be able to help. Roslin looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of deception. She found none. The intensity of the moment forced her to speak the truth she had kept buried since last night. She swallowed hard, bracing herself. Last night, Roslin whispered, the words coming out painfully, Joffrey, he... _______. Roslin returned to her chambers, her mind spinning with doubt and worry. Had she misplaced her trust in Tyrion? It was a dangerous gamble. But what choice did they have? They were alone in a city filled with enemies, and Robb, stubborn, proud Robb, refused to ask for help. He believed they could handle everything themselves, that they could protect Sansa without involving anyone else. But the truth was clear now, doing things Robb's way had left Sansa vulnerable, hurt in the most devastating way, and trapped in King's Landing with her attacker lurking around every corner. As Roslin entered the dimly lit room, she paused in the doorway. Robb was already inside, seated on the edge of their bed, his head bent low as he methodically sharpened his sword. The rhythmic scrape of metal against stone filled the silence. His auburn hair, usually wild and free, was damp with sweat, clinging to his forehead. He was so lost in the reflection of the blade that he hadn't noticed her enter. Roslin stood there for a moment, watching him. There was something raw in his posture, his shoulders tense, his jaw clenched in silent fury. The sword in his hands was not just a weapon to him now, it was an outlet for the rage simmering beneath his calm exterior. He hadn't been able to protect Sansa, and that failure was gnawing at him, eating him alive. Robb, Roslin called softly, stepping further into the room. He didn't look up, the scraping sound continuing as he dragged the whetstone down the length of his blade again. It was as if the sword was the only thing grounding him to the moment, the only thing keeping him from completely unraveling. She moved closer, the wooden floor creaking beneath her feet. Robb, she said again, more firmly this time, and reached out to touch his arm. He flinched slightly, blinking as if suddenly waking from a trance. His eyes, a stormy blue, lifted to meet hers, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. The unspoken tension in the room hung heavy between them. His face, usually so strong and sure, was etched with exhaustion and grief. I didn't hear you come in, he muttered, setting the sword aside on the bed. His voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken in hours. Roslin sat down beside him, close enough that their knees touched. You were lost in your thoughts, she said gently, her hand still resting on his arm. Where's Sansa? I left her in her chambers, Robb said quietly. She asked to be alone. I've posted 2 guards at her door, and she won't be leaving without someone at her side. He paused, his voice faltering as he looked down at his hands, flexing them like he was still gripping his sword. I can't stop thinking, he continued, his tone heavy with guilt. About Sansa, about what Joffrey did to her. I should have protected her. I failed her, Roslin. I failed as her brother. No, Roslin said quickly, turning toward him. You didn't fail her. Joffrey is a monster, and none of us expected him to go this far. Sansa is strong, Robb. But she needs us now more than ever. He let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his damp hair. I should have kept her safe. I should have gotten her out of here with Arya and father. I should have insisted. Now she's trapped. We're all trapped in this damn city. Roslin bit her lip, hesitant to tell him about her meeting with Tyrion. She knew how much Robb distrusted the Lannisters, even Tyrion, despite the imp's reputation for being different from the rest of his family. But she couldn't keep it from him, he needed to know. They had to make a plan, and for that, they needed every ally they could find. I spoke to Tyrion, she finally said, watching Rob's reaction carefully. His expression darkened immediately, his jaw tightening. Tyrion. You went to him. He straightened, a flare of anger flashing in his eyes. Roslyn, how could you? We need help, Rob, she interrupted before he could fully launch into a tirade. You said it yourself, we're trapped here. We can't do this alone, not anymore. Rob stood abruptly, pacing the room, his hands clenched into fists. And you think Tyrion Lannister is the one to help us, he snapped, his voice rising. He's still one of them, Roslyn. He's still a Lannister, no matter how clever or charming he pretends to be. Roslyn stood too, her patience wearing thin. He's our only option. You think I like this? You think I want to rely on him? No, Rob, I don't. But what choice do we have? Joffrey is the king, and he has already started to speak about her, about what happened. If we don't act carefully, Sansa will be ruined. Worse, she'll be trapped with Joffrey forever. Rob's shoulders slumped, the fire in his eyes dimming as the weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. He turned to face Roslyn, running a hand over his face in frustration. I can't stand the thought of that bastard getting away with this, he said, his voice low, raw with emotion. I want to kill him, Roslyn. I want to drive my sword through his heart. Roslyn stepped closer, placing her hands gently on his chest, feeling the tension in his body beneath her touch. I know, she whispered, her voice steady but soft, I feel the same way. But we need to think carefully about this. If Joffrey tells anyone what happened, it won't be the truth. He'll twist everything, make it sound like Sansa wanted him. And once that story spreads, the Tyrells will be forced to pull out of the engagement, disgracing Sansa even more. We should end it before that happens. Rob's brow furrowed, confusion darkening his expression. But why? He asked, his frustration evident. Roslyn took a deep breath, carefully choosing her words. Because Willers Tyrell is no longer a safe option for Sansa. Joffrey will keep them both here, and he will make Sansa his mistress. He's already made his intentions clear. Her voice faltered slightly, but she forced herself to continue. And this time we won't be here to stop him. The confusion on Rob's face shifted to anger, his fists clenching tightly at his sides. Then let's take her home, he said with fierce determination. To Winterfell. She'll be safe there. Rob, Roslyn said softly, stepping closer to him, her eyes filled with regret. I want nothing more than to hide her away in Winterfell forever. But we have to be honest with ourselves. Sansa needs a husband now, more than ever. Joffrey won't just let her go. You know that. She needs a husband who can protect her when we can't. And there's something else we have to face. Rob's jaw tightened. What is it? He demanded, irritation creeping into his voice. Roslyn hesitated, not wanting to wound him further, but knowing she had to be realistic. Rob, she's no longer a maid, she said gently, walking over to him and placing her hand on his arm. She needs someone who is willing to overlook what's happened, someone who will stand beside her, and most importantly, an ally against Joffrey when the time comes. An ally against Joffrey. Rob's voice was laced with doubt and a touch of anger. He didn't want to accept that Sansa's situation had become so dire. Yes, Roslyn said firmly, her resolve growing. I've been thinking about it all day. We'll have to be patient, we'll need to weigh every possibility, but Joffrey needs to die, Rob. Rob's breath hitched, taken aback by her bluntness. You're serious, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Deadly serious, Roslyn replied, her tone unwavering. He has already crossed lines we can never forgive. He is a threat to everyone we care about, Sansa, the North, even you. As long as he's alive, he'll always find a way to torment us, to tear us apart. We can't let that happen. But we need to be smart about this. We need a plan, allies, and timing. And Sansa needs a husband strong enough to protect her in the meantime. Rob turned away, running a hand through his hair, torn between fury and helplessness. I hate this, he muttered. I hate that we can't just act. That we have to play this twisted game. Roslyn moved closer, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. I know. But we can't fight this battle alone. Joffrey's days are numbered, but we have to make sure we win when the time comes. Sansa's safety comes first, and if we can find her a husband who's willing to stand against Joffrey and protect her, it might be our best chance. Robb's fists clenched again, his knuckles white, but this time it wasn't just out of anger, it was determination. Then we find her someone who will stand with us. Someone who will help us bring Joffrey down. Roslyn nodded, relief washing over her that Robb was starting to see the necessity of their situation. We will, she said, her voice steady. But for now, we wait. We plan. And when the time is right, we strike. Robb took a deep breath, his gaze hardening as he looked into her eyes. Then we'll do it together. For Sansa. For the North. For all of us, Roslyn whispered. Chapter 33, Tyrion I. Chapter text. Tyrion I. You need to do something about that boy. Tyrion's voice thundered through the stone corridors as he stormed into his father's office at the top of the Tower of the Hand. His footsteps echoed with the force of his fury, and his face was flushed with anger. The doors slammed behind him, punctuating the eruption of his temper. Tywin barely glanced up from the parchment spread across his desk, his quill scratching lightly as if Tyrion's outburst was nothing more than a passing breeze. His expression remained cold, unreadable, betraying not the slightest flicker of emotion. He took his time, deliberately finishing his line before he acknowledged his son with a single, dismissive look. What boy? Tywin asked, his tone clipped, indifferent, as if he had no need to pretend he didn't know. Tyrion's temper flared hotter at his father's disinterest. You know damn well which boy I mean, Joffrey. Your precious grandson, the king. He's out of control. Tywin set down his quill, his eyes finally meeting Tyrion's, cold and sharp like steel. The king, he corrected in a calm, almost detached manner, is not for you to concern yourself with. Tyrion's laugh was humorless, edged with the kind of bitterness that only a lifetime of contempt could foster. Not for me to concern myself with. The boy's a menace. He's tormenting Sansa Stark beyond what's excusable, and he's made no secret of his desire to keep her here as his personal toy after she's married. Even worse, he's made boasts. Publicly. How long do you think we can keep that quiet? Tywin remained still, a statue carved in marble behind his desk. Joffrey is a king, Tyrion, he said, his voice dangerously soft. And kings do not answer to every petty complaint that comes from their subjects. Nor should they. Tyrion's hands clenched into fists at his sides, the frustration boiling just under his skin. Petty complaints. He raped that girl. Tyrion shouted, this is more than some tantrum, father. The boy is a disaster waiting to happen. He's becoming a liability. If we don't rein him in, there will be consequences, bloodshed. Tywin stood then, slowly, purposefully, his towering figure casting a long shadow over the room. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Tyrion's. Do you think I don't see the flaws in my grandson? Do you think I am blind to what Joffrey is? Tyrion held his father's gaze, his own resolve hardening. Then do something about it. Tywin moved around his desk with the deliberate, calculated grace of a lion stalking its prey. His steps were slow, but every movement radiated power and control, the air in the room growing colder with his approach. He stopped directly in front of Tyrion, towering over him, his cold eyes narrowing as if assessing whether to strike or let his prey continue breathing. He looked down at his son, the disdain in his gaze palpable, as if Tyrion were an insect beneath his boot. You forget yourself, Tywin said, his voice cutting through the air like a sharpened blade, every word precise and measured, laced with chilling authority. The future of this house, our house, rests with Joffrey. He is the king, and no matter his deficiencies, no matter the boy's faults or whims, we will ensure he remains seated on that throne. His tone brooked no argument, as if his will alone could keep the realm intact. Tyrion bristled, but Tywin continued before he could respond, his expression hardening even further. As for the girl, Sansa Stark, she will be dealt with. Stark or not, she is a mere pawn in a game far greater than her, and she has no value beyond what we allow her. If she finds herself carrying Joffrey's child, he said with a flicker of contempt, then she will receive everything that befits the mother of the king's bastard. If not, if you really care about her you should take her to wife and save her reputation. She will be kept in line, one way or another. The casual cruelty in his father's voice sent a chill through Tyrion's veins. Tywine spoke of Sansa as if she were nothing more than a piece on a board, to be sacrificed or exploited as needed. There was no empathy, no thought for the girl who had already suffered so much. Tyrion clenched his jaw, swallowing the retort that burned on his tongue. "And her brother?" Tyrion asked, his voice quiet but sharp, the bitterness in his tone barely concealed. He already knew what his father would say, but the question needed to be asked. Robb Stark was not a man to be easily dismissed, no matter how much Tywine wished to reduce him to a mere footnote in their power struggle. Tywine's lip curled in disdain, the mention of Robb Stark barely worth the flicker of interest it seemed to stir in him. "Robb Stark," he bit out, his voice dripping with contempt, "is nothing more than a loyal dog. He will do as he is told. When the time comes, he'll slink back to the north with his tail between his legs, grateful that we haven't torn him apart." Tywine's gaze was cold, dismissive, as if the Stark boy's fate had already been sealed in his mind. Tyrion clenched his jaw, anger rising in his chest. His father's arrogance was staggering, even for him. He'd seen Robb Stark up close, seen the steel in his eyes, the unyielding loyalty to his family. Robb wasn't a man who would simply fall in line, not after what had happened to his sister, his brothers, his home. "You underestimate him," Tyrion said, his words deliberate, a warning edged with tension. "He's not the naive boy you think he is. He's been through war, loss, betrayal. He won't bend easily, and certainly not if Joffrey keeps pushing him. He will snap." Tyrion knew Robb had the North's spirit in him, the same iron resolve that had made Ned Stark such a respected figure. Robb had inherited that same honor, and a burning need to protect what remained of his family. Tywine's expression remained cold and unmoved, though a flicker of impatience crossed his features. He returned to his desk, picking up a scroll and unfurling it as if Tyrion's words were little more than a nuisance. "The boy is headstrong, I'll grant you that," Tywine said, his tone dismissive. "But honor makes men foolish. I've crushed men with far greater ambitions than a wolf pup pretending to play the game. He will do what's best for the North, for his house, or he will suffer the consequences. A position as the king's mistress is an honor, one which that girl should be grateful for." He glanced up, the chilling certainty in his eyes enough to make even Tyrion's blood run cold. Tyrion shook his head, his frustration mounting. His father's arrogance blinded him to the reality of what they were dealing with. Robb Stark wasn't just any lord, they weren't dealing with petty ambition or simple rebellion. There was fire in Robb, a deep well of anger and pain, and if Joffrey continued down this path, it would ignite into something far more dangerous than Tywine anticipated. "You speak of consequences," Father Tyrion said, stepping forward, "but have you considered that Robb Stark might be the one to bring them to your door? You may think him a mere boy, but he has the North behind him, and his name still commands loyalty. Joffrey's cruelty, his madness, it will provoke him. And when it does, you'll have more than just a wolf pup to deal with. You'll have the North rising against us again, and this time, we might not have the strength to crush them." Tyrion turned on his heel and strode out of the room, a sense of resolve settling over him. If his father refused to confront Joffrey's madness, then it would fall to him to intervene. He knew all too well that ignoring the problem would only allow it to fester, and he was determined to take action before it spiraled out of control. ________. Tyrion swirled the deep red wine in his glass, watching the liquid catch the light as he awaited the arrival of his guests. The rich aroma wafted up to him, but he felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. He was all too aware of the delicate nature of the discussion that lay ahead. "Lord and Lady Starkagard," announced, breaking the heavy silence of the room. As the door creaked open, Tyrion straightened, forcing a smile onto his lips. Robb Stark entered first, his expression stoic and his posture rigid. Following closely behind him was Roslyn, her face pale yet determined. Tyrion noted the weariness in their eyes, a reflection of the turmoil they had endured in recent days. "Thank you for coming," Tyrion said, gesturing for them to take their seats at the intricately carved table, its dark wood polished to a sheen. As they settled into the sturdy chairs, he poured Robb a glass of wine, the deep red liquid sloshing gently against the sides. Tyrion could feel the tension crackling in the air, his mind racing with the implications of the meeting ahead. "My wife seems to believe that you want to help us," Rob said curtly, his tone laced with skepticism. "So how could I refuse such a generous offer?" His eyes narrowed slightly, betraying his protective instincts. "Forgive my husband," Rosalind interjected. "He's tired, it's been a long few days." Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of the distress they had both endured, and there was a resolute strength beneath her words. "A long few months, if we're being honest," Tyrion replied, leaning back in his chair, attempting to project a sense of calm even as the chaos swirled relentlessly in his mind. He took a sip of his wine, relishing the familiar burn as it slid down his throat, hoping it would help to clear his thoughts and ground him in the moment. "How is Lady Sansa?" "As well as she can be," Rosalind said, her tone somber, and she glanced away for a moment, as if searching for the right words among the shadows cast by the flickering candlelight. "She's been through so much, more than anyone should bear at her age. But she's resilient, even if it feels like her spirit is being tested every day." Rob clenched his jaw at the mention of Sansa, anger flaring in his chest. "Resilient or not, she shouldn't have to be. No one should be forced to endure such cruelty," he said, his voice low and tinged with barely contained rage. "Especially not at the hands of Joffrey." Rosalind's eyes softened as she looked at Rob, recognizing the turmoil brewing within him. "You're right, Rob. No one should suffer like this. But Sansa needs support now more than ever. She needs us to be strong for her, to offer her a way out of this nightmare." Tyrion nodded, his brow furrowed as he contemplated the situation. "And that's precisely why I'm here," he said, leaning forward, his expression turning serious. "We need to formulate a plan that ensures Sansa's safety. If Joffrey continues on this path, he could not only ruin Sansa's future but potentially destabilize the entire realm. His actions will have consequences, and we must be prepared. We've spoken about it, and we believe the best course of action would be to marry Sansa quickly," Rosalind said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of the decision. "To someone beyond Joffrey's grasp, someone who can take her far from the capital and protect her." Her gaze shifted from Rob to Tyrion, searching for any sign of disagreement. Tyrion nodded thoughtfully, swirling the wine in his glass before setting it down on the table. "I had the same thought, my lady," he replied. "It's the most viable solution, but it must be done carefully. Any misstep could tip Joffrey off, and we'd risk losing any advantage we might have." Rob, leaning forward, rested his forearms on the table, his expression serious. "There are a few contenders we've been considering, but mostly we want someone who can be discreet. It won't be long until Joffrey makes Sansa's situation well known," he began, glancing at Rosalind for a brief moment before continuing. "My uncle Edmure Tully, he's betrothed to Rosalind's niece, but if we offered..." Tyrion took a deep breath, bracing himself for the reaction he knew was coming as he interrupted. "I'm going to marry Sansa." Rob's laughter erupted instantly, a sharp, disbelieving sound that filled the room. "You're what?" he asked, incredulity clear in his voice as he stared at Tyrion like he had lost his mind. "I'm going to marry her," Tyrion repeated, his tone steady. "After Joffrey's wedding, I'll take her to Casterly Rock. She'll never have to return to King's Landing. She'll be closer to the north, and she'll be free to visit Winterfell as often as she likes." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with implication. Rob shot to his feet, his chair scraping back harshly against the floor. His face was flushed with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. "You have to be joking," he spat, his eyes blazing. "You think I'm going to hand over my sister to another Lannister? After everything your family has done to us? After Joffrey?" Rob's voice cracked as the weight of his anger and helplessness bore down on him. Tyrion stood his ground, his expression composed, though he could see the storm raging in Rob's eyes. "I understand your anger, Rob. Believe me, I do. But this may be the only way to get Sansa out of King's Landing safely. If she's married to me, Joffrey will have no claim to her. She'll be protected under the Lannister name, and I will make sure she never has to face Joffrey again. The Rock will be her sanctuary, not her prison." Rob's chest heaved with the force of his emotions, and he pointed a finger accusingly at Tyrion. "You think you can protect her? You? Another Lannister?" His voice rose with each word, fury seeping into every syllable. Rosalind, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Rob's arm. "Rob," she said softly, trying to calm him. "We need to think about Sansa's safety above all else. Lord Tyrion is kind, he would look after her, she could be happy." Rob looked down at her, his expression torn between the fierce protectiveness of a brother and the painful realization that perhaps they were running out of options. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing, waiting for Tyrion to continue. "I don't expect you to trust me," Tyrion said quietly, his voice losing some of its edge. "But know this, I have no love for Joffrey, and even less for the way he's treated Sansa. If anyone in my family understands cruelty, it's me. I've been on the receiving end of it my entire life. I won't let him hurt her again." His gaze flickered to Roslyn before settling back on Rob. "This isn't about family alliances or politics, this is about getting her away from him. Joffrey cannot step against Sansa if she is his uncle's wife." Rob paced the room, his mind racing. The thought of trusting another Lannister, any Lannister, was unthinkable, yet the logic behind Tyrion's offer gnawed at him. Sansa was trapped, and time was running out. They needed a plan, and as much as it sickened him to admit it, Tyrion's marriage proposal might be the best chance they had to ensure her safety. "Do you honestly believe," Rob said, his voice quieter now, though no less intense, "that marrying her will protect her from Joffrey? From your father? You think they'll let you take her away without consequences?" Tyrion's face darkened, and he spoke with a grim finality. "My father will support this. Sansa is a good match for me as Lord of the Rock. Joffrey will have no room to refuse. If she's my wife, they'll both lose leverage over her, and we can quietly move her out of their reach." Roslyn squeezed Rob's arm again, her expression pleading. "Rob, think about what this could mean for Sansa. Tyrion is right, Joffrey will be preoccupied after his wedding. This may be our only chance to get her away from him." Rob finally stopped pacing, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the decision before him. His eyes met Tyrion's, filled with both suspicion and reluctant consideration. "And what happens after you take her to Casterly Rock?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "What guarantee do we have that she'll be safe there?" Rob pressed, his voice steady but tinged with concern. Tyrion stepped forward, locking eyes with Rob, determination etched on his face. "I swear to you, on my life, I will protect her," he said, his tone serious and unwavering. "I've never asked for much in this world, but I would stake everything I have on this. I will ensure that she's never harmed again." He hesitated for a moment, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "My father has declared me his heir, but it comes with conditions. He demands that I marry a woman from a respectable family and father children on her. Sansa is young and from one of the great houses, he could not hope for a better match. He would give us time, and even then I have cousins, I can live without an heir of my own." Rob stared at Tyrion, his anger simmering just below the surface. But behind it, there was something else, an understanding, however reluctant, that Tyrion might be their best hope. With a slow exhale, Rob spoke, his voice tight. "If anything happens to her." Tyrion gave a small nod. "I know. Underscore 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 underscore." It was only 2 days later that Tyrion stood in his chambers, dressed for his wedding. The fabric of his tailored attire felt heavy against his skin. He had hoped for a day filled with joy, but instead, the weight of impending decisions loomed heavily over him. They had chosen to keep the wedding a secret, especially from Joffrey. The young king would undoubtedly react with fury, but by then, it would be too late to change anything. "You look nice, I'm sure your bride will appreciate the effort," Shae said, her voice laced with barely contained anger as she leaned against the doorway, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Tyrion turned slowly, his face a mix of frustration and resignation. "I didn't ask for this marriage, Shae. I never wanted it." "No." Shae's voice dripped with sarcasm as she pushed herself off the wall, walking toward him with deliberate steps. "She's a beautiful girl, isn't she? You said so yourself." Tyrion sighed, rubbing his temple as if trying to ease the pressure building inside. "That doesn't mean anything. This isn't about beauty or desire. It's about duty and survival. I don't want her, Shae." "Duty?" Shae echoed bitterly. "Is that what you'll tell yourself when you're lying in her bed? When you're playing the good husband? Will it still be just duty then?" I don't have a choice. Tyrion snapped, his voice rising before he forced himself to calm down. He took a step closer to her, pleading with his eyes. You know what Joffrey is capable of. You've seen it yourself what he's already done. That girl, Sansa, can't take much more. He'll destroy her, just like he's destroyed everything else he touches. Shay's expression flickered for a moment, but her resolve didn't waver. She sat down on the edge of his bed, her voice low but insistent. Then come with me. Across the narrow sea. Leave all of this, the Starks, the Lannisters, leave them to their bloody games. We could live our lives far away from this madness. Tyrion's laugh was hollow, almost bitter. And what would I do there, Shay? Become a performer, juggling for copper coins. I'm a Lannister of Casterly Rock, whether I like it or not. My place is here. And mine, she spat, rising to face him. What's my place? Will you keep me hidden away as your whore? Sneak off to see me in the dead of night when your noble wife is fast asleep? My feelings for you have never changed, Shay. His voice was earnest, almost desperate. I'll marry Sansa, yes, but only to protect her. To do what's expected of me. It has nothing to do with us. She scoffed, stepping closer, her eyes blazing. And while you're busy protecting her, what am I supposed to do? Empty her chamber pot and then fuck her husband? Tyrion took a deep breath, fighting to keep his emotions under control. I swear to you, Shay, it won't be like that. No, she asked, her voice sharp. Then what will it be like, Tyrion? Tell me. I'll buy you a house, he said quickly, grasping at any solution that might soothe the hurt he saw in her eyes. A fine house in Lannisport, with guards to keep you safe, servants to care for you. You'll have fine clothes, anything you desire. And if we have children? Children? Shay interrupted, her voice rising in disbelief. You think I want children who will never know their father? Who would be hunted down and killed if their grandfather ever found out about them? Tyrion flinched at her words but pressed on. They would be provided for, Shay. They'd have everything they need. She threw her arms up, mocking his promises with a cruel smile. Oh, look, children. Do you see that castle up there, on the rock? That's where your father lives, with his real wife and the children he truly loves. Listen to me, Tyrion said, his voice low and urgent. You will always be my lady. No matter what. Shay shook her head, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and fury. I am not your lady. I am your whore. You're not, he whispered, stepping closer, his hand reaching out but not quite daring to touch her. You'll always be more than that to me, Shay. I am your whore, she snapped, cutting him off. And when you tire of me, I'll be nothing. Her words hung in the air, the finality of them sinking deep into Tyrion's chest. Before he could say another word, Shay turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Tyrion stood there, staring at the door, the weight of everything, the marriage, his family's expectations, the loss of Shay, bearing down on him. He took a deep breath, trying to swallow the ache that had settled in his throat, but no amount of wine could ease the pain of what he was about to lose. Chapter 34, Sansa 3. Chapter text. Sansa 3. The dress was light and finely crafted, tailored for Roslyn before she had discovered her pregnancy. Its soft grey fabric, trimmed with silver, shimmered in the dim candlelight, flowing to the ground in graceful waves that gathered just below Sansa's bust. It was a beautiful gown, modest and elegant, but not the one Sansa had ever imagined wearing on her wedding day. Nor was this the husband she had dreamed of. The promise of Willers Tyrell had seemed like a beacon of hope once, a future she could endure, but that had been taken from her, like so many other things. Roslyn stood behind her, carefully twisting Sansa's fiery auburn hair into a neat, plaited bun, securing it with delicate pins. You look beautiful, Sansa, she said softly, her voice kind but strained. It was meant to be a comfort, but even Roslyn's gentle words could not ease the weight pressing down on Sansa's chest. Sansa's reflection wavered in the mirror as fresh tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision. She hadn't truly stopped crying since that awful night. Joffrey's attack haunted her every waking moment, and her sleep, too, was filled with nightmares. There were moments when she thought she had found some semblance of calm, but then it would crash over her again, like an unrelenting wave. She would feel Joffrey's breath on her skin, his lips forcing themselves on hers, his. Her tears slipped silently down her cheeks as she remembered how Robb had broken the news to her, his face full of sorrow and regret. She was to marry Tyrion Lannister. At first, she had been unable to comprehend it. Tyrion, the dwarf, the uncle of her rapist. It felt like another betrayal from the world, a cruel twist in the tale of her life. She had imagined her future with Tyrion, fearing what that would mean for her, another cage, another fate she had no say in. Roslyn, sensing the weight of her sorrow, paused in her task of fixing Sansa's hair. She stepped closer, resting her hands gently on Sansa's shoulders. "I know this isn't what you wanted," she said quietly, her eyes meeting Sansa's tear-streaked reflection in the mirror. "But Tyrion will protect you. He has promised it. After Joffrey's wedding, Tyrion will take you far from here. He'll take you to Casterly Rock, and when it's safe, you can come home to Winterfell. You will be his wife in name only." The words were meant to soothe, but they brought little comfort. Sansa knew, deep down, that Roslyn was right. Tyrion was her only hope of escaping the nightmare that King's Landing had become. Sansa wiped at her tears, but they wouldn't stop. What if Tyrion expects something more?" she asked in a trembling voice, unable to bring herself to say the words outright. Roslyn knelt beside her, her expression gentle but firm. "Tyrion isn't like Joffrey," she said softly. "He's kind, in his own way. He'll give you time, Sansa. And if you don't want that, you won't have to." Sansa nodded, though the fear still gnawed at her. She knew Tyrion was different from Joffrey, he had never looked at her with cruelty or lust. But the idea of being married to any man now terrified her. The memory of Joffrey's touch was still too raw, too painful. She felt trapped, even though she knew this marriage, as strange as it seemed, might be her only chance at freedom. The door to the chambers creaked open, and Robb appeared, his face weary but determined. His eyes softened when he saw her, dressed in grey and silver, so young yet burdened by so much. He approached her slowly, kneeling beside Roslyn. "I'm sorry, Sansa," he said, his voice thick with guilt. "I should have protected you. But Tyrion, he will do right by you. I believe that." Sansa nodded again, not trusting herself to speak. She had no more tears left for apologies, no more energy for sorrow. She would marry Tyrion because it was what she had to do, because there was no other path left for her to take. And though her heart ached for the life she had lost, the dreams she would never fulfill, there was a tiny flicker of hope that perhaps, in time, she might find peace. The three of them moved silently through the cold stone corridors, descending deeper into the heart of the castle. The quiet echoed around them, a heavy reminder of what lay ahead. Sansa's heart pounded in her chest, her steps weighed down by dread. The secret wedding would take place far from prying eyes, in the crypt-like depths of the Red Keep. If anyone tried to stop them later, they would simply claim that it was too late, that the marriage had already been consummated, and Sansa was no longer a maid. That part, at least, was true, though not by Tyrion's hand. As they walked, the flickering torchlight illuminated the massive dragon skulls that lined the crypts, their hollow eyes watching as if mocking Sansa's fate. She shuddered, quickening her pace as the eerie silence stretched on. The air was damp and cold, pressing in around her as they ventured further beneath the castle's foundations. The scent of old stone and candle wax hung heavy, and with each step, her anxiety grew. Up ahead, a faint glow appeared, a distant light that marked their destination. Sansa's throat tightened as the scene came into view. Nestled among the towering columns was a makeshift altar. Candles flickered softly, casting a warm glow over the stone floor. They lined the space in neat rows, even tracing a path down what could only be called an aisle. For a moment, the sight was almost surreal, a wedding ceremony hidden in the shadows, away from the grandeur that typically accompanied noble unions. Yet there was a strange beauty to it, a fragile attempt at something sacred amidst the darkness. At the end of the aisle, Tyrion stood waiting, dressed in his finest despite the clandestine nature of the event. His expression was solemn, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. Next to him, the Septon stood ready, most likely hastily summoned from a tavern or backroom, his robe slightly wrinkled and his demeanor uncertain. To Sansa's surprise, Shae stood beside them, on the groom's side, her arms crossed tightly as she watched the proceedings with a stony expression. Sansa's feet felt like lead as they neared the makeshift altar. Every step brought her closer to a future she had never imagined, a life far removed from the dreams of courtly romance she had once cherished. She felt numb, barely able to process the enormity of what was about to happen. This was her wedding day, yet it was unlike any she had ever envisioned. There was no music, no cheering crowds, no lavish feast. Just flickering candlelight and cold stone walls. As they reached the end of the aisle, Rosalind turned to face her. "No one said I couldn't at least try to make it beautiful," she whispered softly, her eyes filled with sympathy. She leaned in to place a gentle kiss on Sansa's cheek, a small gesture of comfort in an otherwise bleak moment. Then, with a reassuring smile, she stepped to the opposite side of the altar, taking her place as a quiet witness to the solemn union. Sansa stared down at the candles, their warm glow blurring as tears pricked at her eyes. She didn't want this. She didn't want to be here, in this dim, hidden corner of the castle, marrying a man she barely knew, let alone one she could never love. But what choice did she have? The life she had once dreamed of was gone, taken from her the moment Joffrey laid his hands on her. Now all she could hope for was to survive, and to find some measure of safety in the days to come. Tyrion shifted beside her, his expression unreadable as he glanced toward her. She wondered if he felt the same sense of helplessness. After all, neither of them had chosen this path, yet here they were, bound by duty, by circumstance, and by the cruelty of the world they lived in. The Septon swayed slightly as he began, his voice slurring just enough to betray how much wine he had consumed before this hasty ceremony. The flickering candlelight cast strange, dancing shadows across the crypt, as if the dragon's skulls themselves were watching. The atmosphere felt oppressive, heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. "We gather here, to witness, the union of Tyrion of House Lannister," he paused, blinking as if trying to remember the next part, "and Sansa, of House Stark." His words tumbled out in a clumsy cadence, and Rosalind shifted uneasily beside Sansa, clearly noticing the Septon's inebriated state. This wasn't how a Stark should be married. Sansa's hands were clenched tightly in front of her, knuckles white, her body rigid as she tried to keep herself from shaking. The Septon fumbled through the sacred words, his eyes unfocused. "Do you, Robb, of House Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Lord Paramount of the North, give this woman to be wed?" Robb stood stiffly, his face tight with a mix of frustration and helplessness. The Lord of Winterfell was reduced to this, giving his sister away in a rushed, secret marriage to a man he neither trusted nor wanted for her. He glanced at Sansa, his eyes softening, betraying the anger he was struggling to suppress. For a moment, Robb's throat worked as if the words refused to come. He had once dreamed of seeing Sansa wed with honor, in the grand halls of Winterfell, surrounded by family and friends. Instead, here they were, in the cold, musty crypts of King's Landing, with only the flickering candlelight and the bones of dead kings for witnesses. It was a far cry from the life he had wanted for her. He swallowed hard, his voice coming out rough but clear. "I do," Robb said, his voice thick with resignation. "I give her." Tyrion stood before Sansa, the heavy crimson cloak of House Lannister in his hands. The fabric shimmered in the flickering candlelight of the crypt, its lion sigil gleaming in gold thread, a symbol of power and dominance, the very things that had caused her family so much pain. He hesitated for a brief moment, glancing down at the cloak as if it, too, carried the weight of his conflicted emotions. "With this cloak, I take you into my house and under my protection," Tyrion said softly, his voice steady but lacking the usual bravado. He took the cloak from Shae, who handed it to him without a word, her face tight with resentment, though she tried to keep her emotions in check. Normally, this moment would have been one of ritual and tradition, a solemn sign of a woman leaving her father's house to join her husband's. Sansa should have been wearing the cloak of House Stark, grey and adorned with the direwolf of her ancestors. It was meant to represent the safety and strength of the North, the heritage of her family. But the Stark cloak wasn't here. Catelyn Stark had taken it back to Winterfell months ago, to be mended and prepared for Sansa's wedding to Joffrey, a wedding that now seemed like a cruel joke, a distant memory from another lifetime. Sansa stood still as Tyrion approached, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her face pale. Her eyes were dry, though she had cried so many tears in the days leading up to this that she felt empty now, numb. The weight of everything, Joffrey's cruelty, her family's absence, the twisted path her life had taken, bore down on her shoulders like a leaden cloak, heavier than any fabric Tyrion could drape across her back. She no longer had the protection of Winterfell or her father's name. What she had now was a hollow marriage to a Lannister, a man she hardly knew but whose family had brought her nothing but suffering. Tyrion stepped closer, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. His gaze wasn't cruel, nor was it filled with desire. Instead, there was something else, an unspoken understanding, perhaps even pity. He was not the monster she had feared in her darkest moments, but that did little to ease the terror that gripped her. This was not the life she had dreamed of, and she doubted it was the one Tyrion had envisioned for himself, either. As Tyrion reached up to place the Lannister cloak on her shoulders, Sansa couldn't help but flinch slightly. It was instinctual, a reaction she couldn't suppress, though she knew Tyrion meant her no harm. The fabric settled around her like a shroud, its rich, regal weight pressing down on her slight frame. She felt engulfed by it, as though she were being swallowed whole by the lions of Casterly Rock, leaving nothing of the girl she had once been. In the sight of the Seven, I hereby seal these two souls, binding them as one for all eternity. Now, repeat the words the Septon slurred, stumbling over his own speech as the weight of too much wine clouded his concentration. Tyrion sighed inwardly, but kept his composure. He glanced at Sansa beside him, her face pale and distant, her gaze fixed on some point far beyond the crypt, beyond him. She was barely present, as if her mind had already fled from the reality of this moment. Tyrion couldn't blame her. Taking a breath, he began the vows, his voice firm and deliberate. Father. Smith. Warrior. Mother. Maiden. Crone. Stranger. I am hers, and she is mine, from this day until the end of my days. Sansa's voice followed his, softer, almost hollow. Father. Smith. Warrior. Mother. Maiden. Crone. Stranger. I am his, and he is mine, from this day until the end of my days. The words, ancient and sacred to many, hung in the air between them like the final nails in a coffin. There was no magic in them, no spark of love or even hope. They were simply the binding chain in a fate neither had chosen. The Septon swayed slightly, his head bobbing as he struggled to find his place in the ceremony. Let it be known, he droned, his rhythm broken and uneven, that Tyrion of House Lannister and Sansa of House Stark are now one heart, one flesh, one soul. Cursed be he who would seek to tear them asunder. Tyrion tensed, knowing what came next. With a kiss, the union is, the Septon began, lifting his arm in a half-hearted gesture. There'll be no need, Tyrion interrupted quickly, cutting off the ritual before it could proceed to that final humiliating act. His voice was firm but calm, a small mercy extended to Sansa in the only way he could manage. He would not force her into a kiss she did not want, especially not here, in front of the drunken priest, his lover watching from the shadows, and the memory of Joffrey's cruelty still so fresh in her mind. Sansa let out the faintest breath of relief, though she said nothing. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides, but she kept them clasped in front of her, rigid and composed. The Septon blinked, confused for a moment, but then shrugged it off, too addled by drink to care about deviations from the usual custom. Ah, yes, well. The union is sealed nonetheless. May the Seven bless this marriage and watch over it. Tyrion inclined his head politely, though he felt no such blessing had been bestowed. As far as the Seven, or any other gods, were concerned, this marriage was a transaction, a shield for Sansa and a duty for him. Nothing more. Nothing less. Roslyn stepped closer and gently squeezed Sansa's hand, her voice soft and reassuring. It's over now, Sansa, she whispered, her words meant only for her. No one can hurt you anymore. I swear it. She wanted to believe her. But even as she stood there, a newly wedded woman, her mind kept returning to the memory of Joffrey, the cruel twist of his lips, the way he had laughed as he humiliated her. How could she ever truly be safe, when he still sat on the Iron Throne, just a stone's throw away? Tyrion glanced at Sansa, his tone calm but firm. After the royal wedding, we'll leave for Casterly Rock, he said. You'll be safe there. I promise. With that, he turned and walked toward Rob, ready to discuss the next steps with him in private. Sansa nodded, though she couldn't find her voice to reply. Safe. She repeated the word in her mind, but it felt hollow. As they turned to leave the crypts, to ascend back into the harsh reality of the world above, Sansa cast one last glance at the dragon skulls that lined the room. Once they had been fearsome creatures, unstoppable forces of destruction. Now, they were nothing but relics of a time long past, like her dreams. And like the dragons, she, too, had been broken. Sansa spent the night alone in her chambers,